It was one of those gray mornings when the world felt like a barely awake dream, and I had just settled into my favorite corner of the couch, coffee cradled in hand, when my phone buzzed with a message that shifted my entire day into a realm of unplanned chaos. My sister, Emily, was in a bind again. My heart sank a little because knowing her, this would not be a small request. She had 2 kids under the age of 5, an energetic whirlwind and a determined toddler, and I loved them both fiercely, though I often felt the weight of responsibility to support her. "Hey, can you watch the kids for a few hours? I've got a last-minute appointment," the text read, and in my mind, I could already picture the screen light illuminating her frazzled expression. I took a sip of my coffee, the warmth spreading through me, and started weighing my options. I wanted to help Emily, I really did. But I had plans, simple ones, just a day to myself to recharge, something I desperately needed after weeks of emotional labor from work. I sat there, contemplating everything, the guilt of saying no, the responsibility that would flicker into my reality should I agree, and the nagging realization that I hadn't met her needs on countless other occasions. Every time she counted on me, it felt a little more like a betrayal of my own needs if I couldn't deliver, just one more notch in the ever-growing tally of my unreliability. With a heavy sigh, I typed back, "I'm so sorry. I really can't today." The regret washed over me almost instantly, as if the warmth of my coffee had become cold. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again, and I braced myself for the emotional cascade that often followed our brief conversations. "You never can you?" Her response was immediate and cut like glass. I could almost hear the hurt in her voice through the screen. A flood of guilt crashed over me. "That's not fair. I'm trying to take care of myself, too," I replied, my fingers hurried but relating each word slowly, as if negotiating my way through a minefield of familial expectation and personal boundaries. We exchanged a few more texts, each tugging at the strings of obligation and disappointment, until the conversation crumbled into silence. I put my phone aside, but it sat there like a weight on my chest, the consequences of my decision ricocheting in my mind. I knew Emily was overwhelmed, that she felt isolated in her parenting journey, but I also felt a flicker of resentment growing. It wasn't just about her, this was about me, reclaiming my space. As the day rolled on, clouds drifted across the sky outside, matching my indecisiveness. I still felt tinged with guilt, yet a little relief flickered with it, and I tried to settle in, allowing myself to embrace the calm, yet I couldn't shake the familiar thought, am I the asshole here? In the days that followed, Emily stopped texting me as much. I caught glimpses of her life through social media, great family outings I was absent from, playground playdates, motherly milestones. It gnawed at me. Had I really chosen my own comfort over supporting her through her storms? One late afternoon, as autumn leaves began swirling down like soft whispers outside, I decided to confront my feelings. I invited Emily over. When she arrived, I opened the door to a face that mirrored a combination of exhaustion and irritation. The tension hung thick between us like a stubborn spider web. Instead of tiptoeing around our recent distance, I invited her to sit down, poured us some fresh coffee, and admitted how I felt, my fears about not being enough, my struggles with selfishness, and the fatigue that sometimes consumed my every thought. To my surprise, she revealed her own struggles, how isolating parenting could be, how she sometimes felt like she was flailing, and how, in those moments of needing help, she often turned to me simply because I was family. This raw honesty broke the tension in the room, revealing a more profound connection between us than I had first believed. By the end of that conversation, we weren't just siblings discussing obligations, we were 2 people trying to navigate the murky waters of adulthood while balancing the people we loved with the need to care for ourselves. Almost instinctively, we agreed to do better, to lean on each other without judgment, and reshape the lines of expectation into something a bit more fluid. The journey to reforge our relationship wasn't a single moment but rather a series of conversations gently steering us back to empathy and understanding. Weeks passed, and although not every moment was perfect, gradually we learned how to share the load better. Sometimes she would find a babysitter, and I'd take the kids for some weekend fun, and at other times, I took a step back when I needed, trusting that Emily could lean on other friends or resources as well. In reflection, I found that prioritizing my own space did not make me an antagonist in Emily's story, but rather a supportive character learning how to also embrace vulnerability. Recently, she sent me a text that read, "Thanks for being so you," which filled me with a warmth I hadn't expected. Not an update of resentment, but one of acknowledgement and love. There are still days where that same guilt creeps back in, where I wonder if there's a balance I haven't struck, but I've found peace in knowing we're both trying, and perhaps that's enough in our labyrinth of life. As I settled into bed that night, the soft glow of my bedside lamp casting a calming light over the stacks of books lining my shelves, I reflected on the journey I had taken with my sister, Emily. That text she sent a few days ago, "Thanks for being so you," felt like a lifeline thrown to me in the turbulent waters of familial expectations and personal limitations. It was a stark contrast to the earlier exchanges we had, when my attempts to carve out my own space in life often clashed with what she deemed necessary, especially as a single mother juggling the demands of work and parenting. I thought back to the times when my refusal to step in as a backup babysitter left her frustrated, and I could almost feel the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. But how could I have been her safety net when my own foundation felt shaky, working through my goals while navigating an ever-evolving sense of self? I learned that while my role was to support, it wasn't to stretch myself so thin that it risked fraying everything I had worked so hard to build. As the light of day dimmed, I listened to the soft hum of the world outside my window, a calming backdrop that echoed my thoughts. Each car that passed, each distant bark from a neighbor's dog, reminded me of the life swirling around me, full of responsibilities and the comforting chaos of family ties. Despite my internal struggles, I tried my best to communicate with Emily, to be honest about where I was emotionally. I remembered the awkward but necessary heart-to-heart we had, sitting on her living room couch surrounded by crayon drawings and scattered toys, an oasis of her life's beautiful mess. I could almost laugh at how we both fumbled with our words, wanting to express our love without resentment spilling out, but eventually, the floodgates opened, and we found grounding in mutual support. Our relationship became a tapestry woven with understanding and adjustment. Each thread was a decision not made in haste but rather inspired by the hope that our bond could foster growth in both our lives. I couldn't always be the safety net she hoped for, but I was willing to be her cheering section, the one who brought a batch of homemade cookies when she was drowning in laundry or offered to listen to her rants about an exhausting day, reminding her to breathe through it. That text was more than gratitude. It felt like we were negotiating contracts of care instead of burdens of obligation, which was liberating in its own right. Now that tranquility rested in the acknowledgement of our roles, I felt lighter despite the hints of apprehension that occasionally lingered in my heart. Closing my eyes, I drifted into a dream where we freely shared laughter and affection without the shadows of guilt haunting our corners. It was both nurturing and freeing, a reminder that as we navigate our labyrinth, it could be filled with the joy of discovery rather than the weight of expectations. Whenever I woke to whispers of doubt, I'd pull that text from the recesses of my memory. "Thanks for being so you." It became my mantra, a gentle nudge to remind me that sometimes, just being there authentically is enough to stitch the frayed edges of our connection back together. And perhaps, in the quiet lessons learned through this journey, we both were becoming stronger characters in our intertwined stories, navigating the winding paths and discovering the beauty in our vulnerabilities. As I settled into this newfound understanding of our relationship, I began to embrace the small moments between Emily and me with a deeper appreciation. It was during one of these moments, a lazy Sunday afternoon, that I found myself sprawled out on the couch, a warm mug of chamomile tea cradled in my hands while rain pattered softly against the window. Emily had come over with her daughter, 4-year-old Mia, a lively bundle of energy who could simultaneously brighten the room and leave it in delightful chaos. Mia, with her wild curls bouncing and eyes sparkling with curiosity, flitted around, exploring the various knickknacks that adorned my shelves. I watched her from my cozy spot, a gentle smile on my face, as Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, her fingers moving skillfully to thread colorful beads onto string for an arts and crafts project they had spontaneously decided upon. The dull thrum of guilt that had followed me like a shadow began to dissipate as my sister and her daughter filled the living room with laughter. Emily glanced up occasionally, her expression soft with gratitude as if to say, "Thank you for opening your space to us." I could see the way Mia's cheeks glowed with excitement and how careful she was in choosing the next bead, pondering the shades and textures with an artist's precision. In that moment, my heart swelled. I realized that being present didn't always mean sacrificing my own needs. Sometimes, it meant simply allowing space for love to flow, like the colors of beads stringing together into something beautiful. As the afternoon wore on, the rain transitioned from a gentle sprinkle to a full downpour, and with the sound of rain drumming against the roof, we retreated to the kitchen, a familiar laughter mixing with the aroma of cookies baking in the oven. I knew I had nothing planned beyond the two of them being there, and as I gathered the ingredients, flour, sugar, chocolate chips, and an old, well-loved mixing bowl, I felt a surge of happiness. A quiet sense of belonging washed over me, and I couldn't help but think that this was precisely how connections could mend, through shared experiences, laughter, and the simplicity of being together. Later, as we sat around the table, cookies cooling on a rack, I felt a sudden need to express my vulnerability to Emily. I took a breath, my hands enveloping the warm mug once more, and spoke about that lingering guilt, the part of me that worried I'd never be reliable enough. I confessed that while I loved them both dearly, I sometimes felt like I was failing at being a sister and an aunt. Emily listened, her brow furrowing slightly, the afternoon light casting gentle shadows across her face. When I finished, a weight lifted, revealing a tender side of our relationship, the understanding that came from sharing. "Hey," she said softly, "we're both learning as we go. I don't expect you to be my safety net, and I'm sorry if I've ever put that pressure on you." Her words washed over me, a balm to my soul. In the days that followed, our bond deepened. Further. From impromptu movie nights to phone calls that stretched late into the night fueled by wine and laughter, I noticed a shift. The overwhelming fear of inadequacy loosened its grip on me, revealing an openness that allowed us both to express our needs without fear of judgment. It was liberating, a dance under the stars of empathy, where we both hesitated and stumbled yet continued to step in time. When Emily called one day, her voice edged with excitement, I hadn't expected her to ask for my help more intentionally. "I have a conference next week, and I need someone to watch Mia, would you consider it?" I felt a surge of panic at the thought of being responsible for a child, but then I remembered how far we'd come. "I'd love to," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The birth of that new chapter in our sibling relationship transformed the tension into anticipation. The day arrived, and I found myself preparing my modest apartment for Mia with the fervor of a holiday preparation. I can still hear the muffled sound of her laughter echoing down the hallway when she arrived, her tiny shoes squeaking against the floor bringing a warmth to my heart. For the next 2 days, our lives became one joyous whirlwind of crayons, storybooks, and creative messes, reminding me that while I may not have been the most traditional caretaker, I could still be present, still be significant. On the last evening of her stay, Mia and I found ourselves on the floor, surrounded by a halo of half-finished drawings and toys. She looked up at me, her big brown eyes wide with wonder, and asked, "Can we stay like this forever?" Her innocence stung my heart, a reminder of the fleeting nature of childhood innocence. Embracing her just for that moment seemed like a promise to always be a part of her life. Once Emily returned, her face carried both weariness and joy, and when she saw the chaos of toys scattered around, she raised an eyebrow playfully. "Did you survive?" I laughed, realizing that the laughter woven through those brief days had created a tapestry of memories neither of us could have anticipated. That feeling of warmth swelled again as Mia clung to my legs, reluctant to leave, and her pleas were enough to keep my spirits high. As I waved them goodbye, a sense of bittersweet nostalgia settled over me. I thought of that earlier text, a digital reminder of acceptance, and I embraced the space we'd created together. Our labyrinth was no longer just filled with turns and obstacles but rich with color, unspoken love, and the assurance that we were both persistent travelers, constantly rediscovering each other, one cookie and laughter-filled day at a time. And with every twist, every pause we took, I understood that we weren't just making it through, we were crafting the story of us, a story worth telling for years to come. It's strange how success can turn familiar faces into strangers, and I found that out the hard way. Just 3 years ago, I was scraping by, working endless hours for a salary that barely covered my bills, while dreaming up my own tech startup. I had wrestled with self-doubt. My wife Lily's family often reminded me of my shortcomings in the most subtle, backhanded ways. During family gatherings, I could always count on Grandma Marge to chuckle lightly and say, "Oh, sweetie, maybe when you grow up you'll find a real job." Or there was my brother-in-law Dave, who would mention my entrepreneurial dreams with an eye roll, citing the statistics of failed startups over a whiskey glass that glinted like a mocking star. They thought they were being jovial, but the undercurrent of disdain was unmistakable, and though I always laughed it off, deep down, it hurt. After countless late-night brainstorming sessions, those sleepless nights turned into something tangible. I launched my company and, against all odds, it began to flourish. I found my stride, hiring talented individuals, attracting investors, and suddenly, the landscape of my life had transformed overnight. As my bank account swelled and the aura of success enveloped me, I was astonished by the way my in-laws began to treat me. It felt as if their earlier skepticism had turned into sudden affection, their calls more frequent, their invitations more insistent. They would ask me for advice on their own ventures. Dave needed help with his small electronics shop, while Marge requested funding for her local charity. At first, I thought it was great. Surely this is what family does, right? We lift each other up. But after a while, the old feelings of resentment resurfaced. Their previous comments echoed in my mind each time I received a new request. I dug deep into myself and realized I was no longer the person they had always looked down on. One bittersweet afternoon, while I savored a cup of coffee and stared out the window at the busy street below, I made my decision. From that moment on, I stopped aiding them. No more money, no more advice, nothing. I felt a strange mix of liberation and guilt. How could I justify this? Was I really an asshole for wanting to distance myself from their past condescension? I recounted to Lily what I had done, my heart heavy with fear of her reaction. She was quiet for a long time, then she simply asked me how I felt about it. I admitted that I felt empowered, but I also worried that it made me unkind, perhaps unforgiving. "You deserve the respect you've earned," she finally said, reaching out to squeeze my hand. It was reassuring, but the nagging doubt remained. Soon enough, Thanksgiving rolled around, and the air was thick with tension. As expected, they were all too eager to reunite and discuss my success over turkey and stuffing, but I felt like a ghost at my own table. All the smiles felt forced, their inquiries laced with a touch of desperation and inadequacy. When Grandma Marge asked for a loan to help refurbish her house, I simply smiled and said I couldn't, that I was focusing my resources on my business. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically see them reeling, struggling to reconcile the image of the once struggling me with the successful version I had now become. It dawned on me that perhaps they feared my rise. I had become the embodiment of everything they used to mock. Eventually, the evening wore on with awkward conversation and strained laughter. It seemed the air of pretension engulfed us, heavier than the dishes piled around the table. As we said our goodbyes, Grandma whispered, "You know, sweetie, it's good to see you doing well. Just remember, family is everything." I nodded, but inside, I felt a strange emptiness, a realization that maybe it wasn't that simple for me anymore. Days turned into weeks, and as I walked the fine line between emotional isolation and newfound freedom, I wavered between self-assurance and regret. I still thought of those family gatherings, how they had shifted so drastically, like falling leaves, beautiful yet tragic. A few months later, after a long day of work, I received a message from Dave, revealing the struggles he faced with his shop. In a moment of weakness, I contemplated extending my hand again but then recalled those biting words from the past. Choosing to stay true to my convictions brought a sense of solace and resoluteness. So, I crafted a balanced response, offering a single piece of advice. Stay determined. You have it in you to succeed. It was an echo, a reassurance of what I had once been. As I laid down that night, I realized I might not be the one in the wrong. Sometimes, severing ties isn't unloving, it's an act of self-preservation. And who knows? Maybe one day we could find a way back to each other. Maybe their perceptions would change, perhaps mine would too. With that thought, I drifted into a dream, a serene visage of hope amidst uncertainty. Update: several months later, I've been contacted again by my in-laws, this time more amiable, with heartfelt apologies and a recognition of their previous behavior. They've actually sought out some of my advice for their own businesses, and while I remain cautious, I'm willing to extend a hand again, just a little. Maybe the road to healing is slow and winding, but I'm finding peace in this journey. As the months rolled on, I often found myself reflecting on those turbulent times with my in-laws. Their negativity had loomed like a shadow over my accomplishments, dampening the pride I felt in my newfound success. Yet, as I watched my own business flourish, I began to ponder whether their critique had been more a projection of their insecurities than a true measure of my worth. I used to dread family gatherings, worrying that I'd have to endure their condescension, but now there hung this strange possibility in the air, an olive branch of sorts. When I received the message from my sister-in-law, I felt a mix of anticipation and caution. Her words were different this time, dripping with sincerity and regret, a stark contrast to the disbelief I had grown accustomed to. "Can we talk? We've been thinking a lot about everything," she typed, and each word pulled at a thread of hope I had nearly severed. That evening, I decided to meet her for coffee, carrying the weight of my reservations like a heavy cloak. As I walked into that familiar cafe, the scent of roasted beans enveloped me, grounding me as I scanned the room for her. When our eyes met, I noticed the tremor in her hands. It mirrored how I felt inside. Practically tiptoeing around the remnants of past grievances, we exchanged pleasantries before she dove in, expressing how their thoughts had shifted. "We've watched you grow from afar. It wasn't fair to judge you the way we did, and I realize now how deeply I misrepresented you," she confessed, sincerity shining in her eyes, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of empathy surface for her struggles. Listening to her recount her own setbacks and the toll they had taken on her self-esteem, a part of me shifted as well, as I understood that we all wrestle with our defeats. I shared my experience, too, describing the pressure of climbing the ladder of success alone, a journey filled with both exhilaration and loneliness. As we spoke, the barrier between us began to dissolve, but the lingering distrust still lingered like an uninvited guest. Nonetheless, I sensed a desire for reconciliation growing, patchwork stitching together the ripped seams of family loyalty. Later, when I returned home, my wife greeted me with a knowing smile. She could tell I'd been wrestling with my emotions but also saw the subtle shift in my demeanor. I felt lighter, as though carrying this burden for so long had only bound me, and I wasn't convinced the past could ever truly be forgotten, but perhaps it could be transformed into something new. Over the next few weeks, I exchanged messages with my in-laws, cautiously engaging with their requests for advice, offering my insights into their ventures. They were eager to learn, humbled in ways only harsh reality can teach, and I found myself reveling in the irony that I, once the scorned, now played the role of mentor. As I watched them embrace their new roles, peacefulness enveloped me. Within the cracks of our past, budding companionship sought to emerge. But with every message and every encounter, I kept my heart grounded, vigilant against letting history repeat itself. Trust takes time to mend, and while the path forward is uncertain, I've realized that healing often requires both vulnerability and boundaries. I might have stepped into this journey tentatively, but each small interaction now feels like a step toward a brighter future. Am I the asshole for having almost severed ties? Perhaps. But sometimes, in the space where hurt and healing collide, understanding can create a bridge, one where I've started to rebuild, one cautious step at a time. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself in a peculiar state of reflection, teetering on a tightrope stretched between the past and the potential future. Each email from my in-laws pierced the silence of my routine, a mixture of trepidation and curiosity spiraling through me. I would sit at my desk, the golden afternoon light spilling through the window, casting patterns on the floor, and I would stare at their names on the screen as if they were foreign inscriptions from a long-gone civilization. It wasn't that I wanted to forget their past behavior, how they had scoffed at my ambitions and belittled my modest beginnings in favor of grounded expectations, but there was something persistently hopeful about their current tone. Their messages dripped with sincerity, laced with admissions of previous harshness, and I wondered if they, too, felt the weight of that pivotal moment when my little tech business surged into a thriving venture. It became evident that they weren't just reaching out with empty niceties, they were grappling with their own narratives, reconciling their feelings, and wondering if the family they had once deemed beneath them could now be considered a source of guidance. In one of those exchanged emails, they proposed a casual lunch, a neutral ground, a safe space for both sides to express and explore without the stifling attachment of unresolved tension. I found myself conflicted, tapping my fingers against the polished wood of my desk, picturing the cafe where we might meet. A quaint little spot with soft jazz playing in the background, birds chirping outside, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. What if I walked in, and the very sight of them ignited a whirlwind of my old hurt? Or what if, in the midst of pleasantries, I found a surprising twist of warmth amidst our shared history? Ultimately, I decided to agree to the lunch. Perhaps it was the willingness to embrace both the potential for pain and healing that propelled me forward. As the date approached, I crafted a mental script, a blend of caution and openness, how I might articulate my feelings but blend them with understanding. The moment I stepped into that cafe, my heart raced with each breath, a symphony of uncertainty built within me. I saw them there, my in-laws, sitting at a sun-drenched table, visibly different from the sharp-edged figures of my memory. Their smiles were soft, framed by an unfamiliar tenderness that made it hard to reconcile with the past. The conversation began stilted, filled with careful pleasantries and awkward laughter until eventually, warmth began to seep in, easing the tension like the gentle coverage of a summer blanket. As we talked about benign topics, I felt an invisible barrier start to wane, replaced by a creeping sense of shared humanity. Their stories of struggles echoed my own, their dreams revealing shades of ambition that once felt hidden beneath their dismissive exterior. Something within me flickered, a burgeoning understanding fueled by empathy. I saw them not as the antagonists of my story but as individuals who, like me, were navigating their own trials in a rapidly shifting world. The discussion eventually shifted towards our businesses. I could feel them leaning closer, seeking not just my counsel but aiming to share in mutual growth. And as I offered insights, I realized that this was what healing looked like, not denial of the past but rather embracing it as part of the complex tapestry of relationships. It felt liberating, almost as if by extending my hand despite my previous reservations, I was affirming my worth not just as a son-in-law but as a person with insights worth sharing. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, a new rhythm began to form. We exchanged phone calls that seemed to ease into the comfort of familiarity, their laughter weaving through my days like the melody of a calming hymn. Their once utilitarian approach to me transformed into a blooming collaboration of ideas. There was an almost childlike enthusiasm in their exchanges, a realization that they could learn from me just as much as I could learn from them. It was a refreshing reversal of roles that dispelled the lingering shadows of resentment. Yet, I upheld my boundaries. I was watchful, guarding against the cynical whispers that danced in the corners of my mind, reminding me of the bitter words once spoken. It was a balance, one that required patience and discernment. But I knew that healing isn't merely a linear journey, it's more like a winding path through an intricate forest, where even the hard roots can display breathtaking blooms when nurtured patiently. Sometimes, I still find myself reflecting on whether my initial decision to put distance between us was right. Am I the asshole for having almost severed ties? The answer remains murky, cloaked in the complexities of human emotion and interaction. Yet, through this journey, I have come to embrace the ambivalence, allowing it to shape me rather than confine me. I realize that forgiveness is not an erase button but rather an ongoing negotiation of ourselves with those we share history with. And so, where once I felt fragmented, haunted by the past, I now sit in a quieter place, knowing that bridges can be rebuilt if we are willing to put in the effort, and that sometimes, it's in our grappling with hurt that we stumble upon unexpected beauty. Perhaps it's true, sometimes, the road doesn't lead back to where we began, but rather forward, towards something entirely new. The moment my brother Caleb handed me his phone, I felt an inexplicable chill settle in the pit of my stomach. "Could you check something for me? I think Jess might be hiding something," he said, his voice barely tinged with uncertainty. Jess had been Caleb's girlfriend for just over a year, and while I had always found her charming and intelligent, there was an underlying tension that seemed to cling to her whenever I was around. It was as if she had constructed an elaborate house of cards in her life, and I was about to be the wind that brought it all crashing down. I sat down on the couch, the familiar scent of fresh coffee and the faint sound of rain tapping against the windows creating a warm cocoon around me, but the gravity of the situation pulled my focus. I opened Caleb's messages, hoping to find some innocent indication of Jess's newfound secret instead of finding any wrongdoing. As I scrolled through conversations filled with typical banter, one unfamiliar name caught my attention. It belonged to a Casey, someone who seemed to take up an unexpected amount of Jess's time, nights spent studying together, late-night texts that were anything but casual. An uneasy feeling settled over me. The more I read, the more a picture of deceit began to form. I felt torn. Jess had always treated me kindly, had welcomed me into their shared world like a sister, yet here I was, caught in the web of someone else's potential infidelity. When Caleb's voice broke through my thoughts, asking what I found, all I could manage was a half-hearted shrug. Nothing, just some study group. But the unease lingered. Over the following days, I found myself looking at Jess through a different lens, noticing the small signs that now seemed glaring, her constant checks of her phone even when she was with Caleb, the way she smiled a little too brightly whenever someone else mentioned Casey. One rainy afternoon, I couldn't contain my curiosity any longer. When Jess called me for a casual lunch, I found the courage to broach the subject in a light-hearted way, hoping to gauge her reaction without being accusatory. "So, how's your study group with Casey going?" I asked, letting the words hang in the air. For a moment, she froze, a fleeting shadow of panic crossing her features before her smile swiftly returned, though the tightness in her eyes betrayed her. "Oh, Casey? He's just a friend from class. You know how studying can get." There it was, the slight stutter in her tone and the way she looked away. My heart sank. I had to say something, confront her lies head on, but the thought of doing so felt like stepping into a minefield. I convinced myself to keep watching, to gather more evidence for Caleb. Days turned into weeks, and the sense of dread grew heavier, my conscience pulling me in two conflicting directions, one saying to protect my brother and the other warning me to respect Jess's space, the fragile veneer of our friendship hanging by a thread. Eventually, during a family dinner, I found myself sitting across from Jess, her laughter blending into the warm melodies of my parents' bantering. It highlighted the dissonance I felt, like a sour note in an otherwise pleasant song. Caleb nudged my elbow, an innocent gesture that echoed loudly in my mind, reminding me of the precarious balance I had to maintain. The moment finally arrived when Jess excused herself from the table to take a phone call outside. My brother watched her retreating figure, a faint smile on his lips, but I couldn't match his joviality. It was time to take a stand. I turned to him, my pulse racing, and said, "Hey, Caleb, can I talk to you for a second?" I dragged him to the quiet of the hallway, the soft hum of family chatter fading into the background. "I think Jess might be lying to you," I blurted out, my words tumbling over each other, fueled by relentless guilt and desperation. His expression shifted from casual to concerned, then to pained disbelief. "What do you mean?" he whispered, the weight of my accusation hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I hesitated, wrestling with my conscience, but the evidence amassed within me finally burst forth. I recounted my findings, how Jess's demeanor shifted, the text that felt all too personal, the way she avoided the topic when prompted. Caleb's face blanched, his mouth went dry as he processed my words. I immediately saw the doubt sketched across his face, the whipsaw of emotions flashing in his eyes, from denial to anger and finally to the cold, hard truth that lay just beneath the surface. Jess returned just in time to witness the storm brewing between the two of us. The atmosphere shifted palpably, and often the truth is that you don't need a hurricane to reveal how stormy the waters are underneath. A single ripple can cause the greatest waves. When she cornered us, she could sense the tension, her smile faltering, and in that moment, I felt the breath of regret freeze in my throat. The confrontation was swift and brutal, Jess unraveling before us like a fragile thread, her words spiraling into a defensive and contradictory mess. It had taken everything in me to voice the truth, but in the end, I merely felt hollow as Caleb grappled with the aftermath of my revelation. Jess defended her actions as innocent until proven guilty, caught in a lie but refusing to completely break down. Each attempt she made to regain his trust slipped further away, like sand through her fingers. When Caleb asked her about Casey, I could see hope fading in his eyes, replaced with an aching sense of betrayal. By the end of the night, Jess packed her things in a hurried, panicked frenzy, slamming the door of our home behind her, leaving a void that felt impossible to fill with laughter and light. It struck me how quickly a story could change, how slipping revelations could reshape not just lives but the very spaces they inhabited. Weeks passed, and the echoes of that confrontation lingered. Caleb and I lived amidst the silence of grieving for what was lost, both of us tiptoeing through the wreckage of a relationship that once felt solid and true. I thought I had captured a villain in Jess, yet I found myself in an unintended duel with my own integrity and the bonds of brotherhood. Conversations with Caleb were shorter, occasionally punctuated by awkward silences that left both of us feeling raw and exposed. I began to wonder if I had overstepped, if my loyalties to my brother had come at the cost of a friendship that might have merely needed a bit of time and honesty. It was a dangerous game to play, caught between being the good sibling and the potential destroyer of dreams. Yet, as my brother began to heal, slowly piecing together his heart, I learned that sometimes the hardest truths have to emerge to clear the air, no matter how painful. Caleb found solace in time spent with friends, rebuilding his foundation and exploring new paths, while Jess became a memory too volatile to unpack right now. Months later, as winter settled in, snow blanketing our world in peace, I found myself reflecting on that chaotic time. Unexpectedly, I received a text from Jess, nothing substantial, just an apology. It carried the weight of her unburdened heart, a message of acknowledgement that seemed to hum with a quiet sincerity. "I was wrong, Caleb deserves better, and I am sorry for everything." My chest tightened as I contemplated sending it to him. Would he even want to know? Would it open old wounds? In that moment, I realized that life's intertwined paths shape our journey, they twist and turn through relationships in ways we can't always foresee. Perhaps the conclusion lay in forgiveness, not just for Jess, but for me too, for flaws as we all do. With time, the shadows receded, and emotions transformed into memories, leaving us both a little more tender but a lot more resilient. Life continues to curve into unforeseen directions, but I cherish the lesson of honesty in relationships, the quiet understanding that sometimes being someone else's support means asking the hard questions, even if it feels like you're lost amidst the whispers of doubt. And that is where, stripped back to the essence of our shared humanity, we all linger, between mistakes and redemption, in the heart of being imperfectly human. As I reflect on how my journey unfolded, I can't help but recall all the little moments that led me to that fateful encounter with my brother's girlfriend. It had begun as a regular Saturday afternoon, sun-dappled and lazy, the kind where time felt infinite. I was tidying my small apartment, Putting on a podcast that spiraled from true crime stories into the endless chatter of Reddit threads, a guilty pleasure I often indulged in while organizing my life. Somewhere in the background, the hosts debated a post titled "A Myth Asshole for Ruining My Brother's Relationship?" The words lingered in the air, resonating with my own bubbling thoughts. You see, my brother, Evan, had been dating Mia for nearly a year. At first glance, they seemed perfect for each other, their laughter echoing through family dinners. But as the months slinked by, little discrepancies began to prick at my intuition. I'd catch Mia giving evasive answers during simple conversations. If Evan asked her something seemingly innocent, she'd quickly change the subject or brush it off with a laugh that felt too forced. My protective instincts kicked in, and the more I observed, the more my unease mounted. One evening, I invited them over for dinner, eager to get a deeper glimpse into their relationship. The three of us sat around the wooden dining table, the aromatic smell of baked chicken wafting through the room. As Evan poured glasses of wine, I caught Mia's eyes darting toward her phone like a trapped bird seeking freedom. I tried to pull her into the conversation with stories of our childhood, hoping to bring a nostalgic warmth to the air. Yet, when I mentioned the time Evan tore his favorite t-shirt at the annual family picnic, I saw her brow furrow ever so slightly, and my stomach dropped. It seemed, in that fleeting moment, she had no idea what I was talking about. Intrigued, I pressed on, casually bringing up old family tales, noticing how her smile became increasingly strained. By dessert, she seemed little more than a perfect stranger sitting at my table. The evening wore on, laughter fading into polite smiles, and as the last plate was cleared, Mia excused herself. I was left with Evan, who looked so content, unaware of the unease that had tightened around my chest. I found myself grappling with a moral quandary. Did I bring it all up and risk ruining his happiness? Or did I quietly dismiss the nagging doubts festering inside me? Days turned into weeks, and the lingering doubt settled into my routine like a heavy quilt, suffocating and uncomfortable. I couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't right. Then I stumbled upon a post from a mutual friend on social media, a photo captioned with a location that made my heart race. Mia had claimed to be out with friends that day, but the photograph clearly showed her at a local cafe with someone I didn't recognize, a man, laughing and leaning in closer than friends should. That gut instinct ignited like a wildfire. I felt I owed it to Evan to confront Mia. The next Sunday, I was thrust into the role of an unwitting detective. I invited Mia over under the guise of wanting to hang out, my heart pounding as I collected my thoughts, preparing for what would unfold. We sipped tea in casual silence until the air thickened. I casually mentioned the photograph. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and I could feel every nerve ending in my body come alive with tension. "Oh, that was just a friend from college," she blurted, and I saw in her demeanor what I had feared, a slip, an inflection that rang hollow. "We were just catching up." It would have been simple to drop it there, to dismiss the sick feeling pooling in my gut, but something inside me made me push further. The moment stretched as we talked, dissecting her explanations, and with each feeble justification, her facade began to fray. I found myself caught in an emotional tempest, feeling as if I were standing on the precipice of betrayal from my brother, knowing full well that the truth I sought could lead to devastating consequences. In the end, my apprehension dissipated when Mia confessed, her voice shook, sincerity washing over her. "I didn't want to hurt Evan," she said, tears brimming. "But I felt trapped in our relationship. There's someone else, yes, I've been seeing him, and I thought if I avoided betrayal by lying, it wouldn't hurt him as much." There it was, raw and exposed. She had caught herself in the web of a lie, and the weight of it pressed hard against my chest. I now had the burden of this knowledge not only for myself but for Evan. When I eventually shared everything with him, I felt that peculiar mix of resolve and heartbreak, knowing the path forward was strewn with strife but also clarity. As he processed the news, I felt empathy anchoring me amidst the unfolding chaos. That day would mark the beginning of a slow healing for Evan, a journey filled with tears, and reassessment that eventually led to closure, but more importantly, a chance for him to reclaim his narrative. Reflecting on those events still evokes a cocktail of emotions within me, grief, anger, and ultimately, relief that truth settled in like a balm. Time would teach us lessons, and while I wrestle with the aftermath of having disrupted their lives, I hold on to one clear takeaway: love thrives on trust and honesty. Even as the shadows of uncertainty loom, I am thankful for the light that chased them away, reminding me of the importance of integrity in our ties. And poignantly, I found myself nestled within the web of imperfect humanity, each thread a testament to the resilience of our hearts. This is where I linger now, at the crossroads of relationships and honesty, learning to navigate my own role within life's beautiful, complex tapestry. As I stand at this crossroads, the days slowly unravel, each bringing its own share of contemplation and dialogue, not only with the people around me but also within the quiet corners of my mind. The initial chaos that my actions set in motion has settled into something softer, more contemplative, akin to the lingering echoes of a storm that has passed, leaving only the calm light of dusk in its wake. I find myself revisiting the conversations I had with my brother, Ethan, and Jess, the woman he was dating. She has since become a stranger, not for lack of connection but for the intricacies that emerged when the truth shattered the slightly gleaming facade we had shared. Every time I reminisce about that night, I remember the gentle hum of the ceiling fan above me, casting playful shadows on our faces as we sat around the dining table, the remnants of takeout strewn, forgotten, a faint aroma of spice lingering in the air. It was supposed to be an ordinary get-together, one of those fond reunions where laughter and teasing flew as easily and freely as the drinks. In hindsight, I understand it was those very moments that held the seeds of discontent, edged with secrets and suppressed whispers. The evening turned when I casually mentioned a conversation I had overheard a few weeks prior, settling into the comfort of familiarity. I didn't intend to spark anything dangerous, but when Jess's gaze faltered, a flicker of tension darting across her face, I recognized a vulnerability hidden beneath her polished exterior. I could feel it in my bones, something was off, as if I had stumbled onto an unseen fault line between friendship and honesty. My words became a mirror reflecting back not only her reaction but also the complexity of each of our lives that felt so simply woven together at first glance. The once warm smiles turned brittle as I sensed uncharted territory emerge, and my heart raced in response, caught in the thrall of worry and confusion. Was I the villain here? How had these simple words unleashed a storm I had barely understood? In the aftermath, Ethan's hurt echoed through the walls of our shared memories, changing their texture, creating waves that rippled through every interaction, leaving me grappling with my own lingering guilt. I had unintentionally stripped away the safety of their shared world, and for that moment, the world felt heavy with uncertainty, casting shadows that felt almost unbearably long. Yet, as time unfurled, I witnessed them begin to untangle their own narrative, seeking solace in honesty that transcended the initial hurt. Watching from a distance, I felt a shift. Ethan, brave and resilient, began to reclaim his agency, powerfully confronting the threads that had sought to bind him in silence. Jess, caught amidst the chaos, sought forgiveness and healing. Her armor had cracked, revealing vulnerabilities that she had hidden even from herself. It was beautiful, and painfully raw, to see two people who loved each other engage in this intricate dance of possibility and renewal. As for me, my perspective widened, becoming a reflective pool where I realized that love is not merely an idealistic construct but a battleground where truths and lies intertwine, a place where both light and shadow dwell. I became a witness to their vulnerability, harboring an understanding that while I had played a part in unearthing the lie that had woven through their relationship, the journey towards honesty was one they had to undertake themselves. I learned that the path to healing is never straight but often obscured by the fog of fear and hesitation, yet it held the promise of growth and restoration. Now, as I sit alone in quiet reflection, the air filled with the soft rustle of leaves outside my window, I understand the importance of navigating these murky waters. I've come to acknowledge that it is often the remnants of past mistakes that can lead us into brighter tomorrows, as we strike a delicate balance between holding on and letting go. Savoring the bittersweet experiences leads us to a deeper communion with our humanity, revealing that perhaps, in the end, we are defined not by our flaws but by our resilience in overcoming them. As I ponder this, I remind myself that even amidst uncertainty, love, raw, honest, and sometimes painful, thrives through the knowledge that we will stumble, yet in our stumbling lies the chance to rise anew. Here, nestled firmly in the fabric of our entwined lives, I find solace, realizing that the heartbeat of humanity, fraught with misunderstanding yet rich in love, will continue to guide us through the ever-evolving journey of connection. I've always prided myself on being a generous person, but the last few months have turned that belief on its head, and now, I find myself questioning my own values. My girlfriend, Rachel, and I had been together for just over a year when she broached the subject of her kids needing cars. Now, let me clarify, Rachel has 2 children from a previous marriage, Jenna, who is 15, and Max, who is 13. From the moment I met them, I felt an instant bond. Jenna had this fierce spirit, often caught between her childhood and looming adulthood, while Max was a whirlwind of energy, always looking to make people laugh. Sharing time with them was pure joy. Yet, As Rachel's kids got older, the conversations inevitably shifted to the need for independence. They wanted their own rides to school, friends' houses, and extracurricular activities. It was an ordinary Thursday when Rachel casually said, "You know, I've been thinking the kids really need cars to be more independent. Wouldn't it be great if we could pick something up for them?" At first, I chuckled, thinking she was joking. Surely, she didn't expect me to dive into a discussion about buying 2 cars just like that. But when I saw the look on her face, half serious, half hopeful, I realized this was no lighthearted suggestion. I could feel the knot tightening in my stomach as I recalled my own struggles. I was still paying off student loans and saving to start a life of my own. I hesitated, my mind racing through various possibilities, trying to balance my own financial responsibility with the desire to support Rachel and her family. The conversation became heated, but I remained calm. "Rachel, I love your kids, but I can't afford to buy them cars. It's just not realistic for me," I explained, choosing my words with care. She seemed taken aback, disappointment settling in her eyes. "I thought we were in this together," she said softly, and I felt an unwelcome sting of guilt. It wasn't just the idea of cars, it was the unspoken tension between a partner who wanted to share burdens and a guy who was barely keeping his head above water. Over the following weeks, the tension lingered. I noticed subtle changes in Rachel's demeanor. She became quieter, often lost in thought. On one occasion, while driving back from a family dinner, Jenna asked casually if I was going to buy them cars. I felt a sharp pang in my heart, not wanting to disappoint her but also knowing how strained my finances were. "It's complicated, Jenna," I replied, hoping to deflect. The laughter we used to share felt overshadowed by unspoken expectations and misunderstandings. Around this time, I took a hard look at myself and the relationship. I adored Rachel, and these kids meant the world to me, but it seemed I was inadvertently stepping into roles I wasn't ready for. I loved that Rachel envisioned a future where we united our families, but I had to be cautious about my own needs too. I chose to clear the air. "Rachel," I said one evening, taking her hand. "I care about you and your kids, but I also have to think about my financial goals. I'm not saying I won't help out in other ways, like giving rides or supporting them, but I can't commit to buying them cars." As I confessed my frustrations, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Rachel listened quietly, her expression shifting from disbelief to understanding. "I get it," she said finally, her voice softening. "Sometimes I forget you're still figuring things out for yourself." I could sense the relief in her voice when we turned the corner, leaving anger and disappointment behind. From that point forward, our relationship evolved. I started finding ways to help Jenna and Max without putting myself in financial jeopardy. We worked on small projects together, and I even taught them how to save up for things they wanted. Months later, I received a message from Rachel that made my heart swell. "The kids are working on their savings for cars. I think they've adopted your advice," she wrote, and I couldn't help but smile at the thought of them taking initiative. As we sat together that night, reminiscing over our journey, it became clear that we had come a long way. Though my situation hadn't changed much financially, I was at peace knowing we had built a stronger bond through honesty and support. Reflecting on it all, I found comfort in the notion that relationships aren't about merely giving, they're about growing together through adversity. I had feared being seen as selfish, but in the end, what transpired reaffirmed a truth: it's important to recognize one's own limits and communicate openly. I was still part of their lives, just in a different role. And as I fell asleep that night, I felt grateful for the love we had cultivated amid uncertainty, looking forward to all the moments yet to come. Update: a few weeks later, Rachel and I sat down with Jenna and Max to discuss plans for their first car. Instead of just handing them cash, we organized a small family project, painting and refurbishing an old car Rachel's parents had. The kids were ecstatic and learned invaluable skills throughout the process. Watching them work on something they could own ignited a sense of pride in them, but more importantly, it strengthened our bond as a family. In the end, it was about much more than just the cars. It was a lesson in responsibility, independence, and support that we would all carry forward. As the days turned into weeks, our little project blossomed into something more than just a car refurbishment. It became a way for Jenna and Max to understand the value of hard work and teamwork, lessons that would follow them into adulthood. The garage was filled with a blend of laughter and the occasional argument over color choices, tools, and who was in charge of what task. I found myself laughing more than I had in years, feeling like a part of something bigger as I watched Rachel cheer them on, wiping her hands on an old rag and beaming with pride. One Saturday, I suggested that we decorate the trunk with positive affirmations. Each kid could choose a quote that inspired them. Jenna picked "Believe in yourself," while Max, still a bit of a jokester, went with "I fixed it, so I own it." Rachel and I scrambled to find some old paint and brushes, and soon the trunk of the car emblazoned with their chosen words became a family masterpiece. The act of creating something that was truly theirs, a canvas on wheels, made Jenna and Max light up in ways that store-bought gifts never could. I remember one afternoon, after splashing paint around and making ridiculous faces while trying to channel my inner artist, Jenna turned to me with her bright blue eyes shining. "Will you help us do this again someday?" she asked, her voice earnest. I nodded, caught up in the moment. "Absolutely. This can be the first of many projects. We'll build cars, tree houses, or even go-karts, whatever you can think of." The commitment struck me as I spoke, the weight of my words settled in my chest, but it also felt electric, like I was weaving threads into our growing fabric of family. As the weeks continued to pass, we worked diligently, putting in time every weekend, replacing parts, and learning about the engine. I took on the heavier, more technical parts while Rachel guided the kids through the finer points of sanding and painting. Each task was a chance for Jenna and Max to ask questions, and for us to share stories of our own youthful follies, like the time I managed to get my first car stuck in a mud pit because I thought four-wheel drive meant you could drive anywhere. One evening, while we cleaned up after a particularly messy painting session, I was surprised to see a glimmer of uncertainty appear in Jenna's eyes. She had always been the more confident of the two, but tonight, something was off. "Are we doing it wrong?" she muttered, glancing at the splatters of paint that dotted the ground, some bold strokes that had landed on her shirt. It struck me then just how important this whole experience was to her. If the car didn't turn out perfect, would that mean we had failed some unspoken test? I knelt down beside her, resting my arms on my knees. "What do you think?" I asked gently. "Does it feel like we're working together? Are you having fun?" She frowned for a moment, staring at the paint on her shirt and considering. "Yeah, but the car needs to look perfect." "Jenna," I said softly, "life isn't about being perfect. It's about learning, growing, and having fun along the way." I watched as the words sank in, her expression slowly shifting toward relief and understanding, like the clouds lifting after a storm. Finally, the day came when we would unveil the refurbished car. We had all worked tirelessly, and the anticipation electrified the air as we gathered in the driveway for the big reveal. The sun shone down, catching the bright colors that adorned the car's surface in a way that made it look almost magical. Rachel stood beside me, her hand clasped in mine, her eyes glistening with excitement. Jenna and Max stood in front of the vehicle, their faces a mixture of disbelief and sheer joy, and as they reached out to touch their creation, I felt a surge of pride that ran deeper than I expected. Jenna joined Max in jumping up and down, squealing with happiness, and Rachel and I exchanged a glance, a silent confirmation of what we had built together, not just in terms of the car but within our family unit. I knew this was a moment they would remember, a fragment of time marked by laughter, creativity, and the unwavering bond we shared. Later, as we took turns behind the wheel on a quiet street, what struck me wasn't just the shiny paint or the engine purring, it was the way Jenna and Max discussed their plans for their driving future, each word a reflection of their blossoming maturity and sense of responsibility. I couldn't help but smile, thinking back to the conflict I had initially faced regarding whether or not I should buy them cars. The struggle had been real, but what we gained was immeasurable. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a sense of fulfillment wash over me, a warmth that spread from my chest to my fingertips. In teaching them the value of ownership and effort, I found that I was learning alongside them. Suddenly, our pastime projections morphed into a bonding experience, a way for Rachel and I to not only build cars but to build a family, brick by cherished brick. A week later, I received a message from an old coworker who wanted to update me about a job opening. The idea of returning to work jostled around in my brain, but I barely thought about it. Something deeper was stirring within me. The realization that I didn't need a high-paying job to feel fulfilled came to me like a whisper. I had discovered a different way to be present, engaged, and genuinely happy. Although our yard was filled with laughter from our car projects, I had also conjured an understanding that family was not just defined by blood, but by the memories we created together. Several months later, as our car adventures continued to unfold, Jenna and Max decided they wanted to do something special for Rachel and me. One afternoon, they surprised us with a picnic in the park, complete with sandwiches and homemade cookies that had some very creative, but slightly chaotic icing. We laughed as they took charge of the basket, and as we settled down beneath a tree, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. As I watched the kids run around, their laughter a melody of joy, I realized that I would never trade these moments for material things. I might not have given them cars without conditions at first, but I had given them the tools to navigate life more effectively, which would prove to be far more valuable in the long run. Reflecting on everything, I realized that though my initial hesitation stemmed from wanting to be a responsible adult rather than a flashy type, it had led to something far more profound, and although I would probably always be the one saying, "Let's paint the trunk," I had also become the dad who could tell a joke, share genuine pieces of wisdom, and make memories that would last a lifetime. Sometimes, I would hear Jenna and Max reminiscing about our adventures, and I couldn't help but feel that we were building not just a family of the future but a legacy, one filled not just with cars but with the cherished stories of our lives. As the days passed, our weekends became filled with laughter, paint splatters, and the smell of motor oil, a unique blend of chaos and joy that transformed our garage into a makeshift workshop and a haven for memories. Rachel would often send me gentle nudges of encouragement as I attempted to wield a wrench while Jenna and Max handled the power tools with surprising finesse. Each time they'd succeed in fastening a bolt or sanding down a rough edge, their smiles would widen, the joy resonating in their eyes as if they'd just conquered a mountain. These moments were powerful reminders of how quickly they were growing up, and each project fueled my desire to be more present and supportive in their lives. One evening, as dusk began to settle in, we found ourselves sprawled out on an old blanket we'd tossed in the trunk while we waited for paint to dry. The kids shared their dreams. Jenna wanted to travel the world and write stories of her adventures, while Max, always the jokester, mused about becoming a famous comedian. As I listened, I realized that this experience was about more than just cars. It was forging a foundation for their ambitions and aspirations. Weeks later, the old car began to transform. It was no longer just a rusted frame. It became a vibrant representation of teamwork, laughter, and shared sweat. We painted it in bold blues and cheerful yellows, mixing colors as if each swirl of paint was a thread in the tapestry of our newly formed family. Friends and neighbors stopped by, often asking if they could lend a hand, turning our small project into a community affair. One Saturday afternoon, while the kids and I painted the hood, Rachel appeared with freshly baked cookies, and her eyes sparkled with pride as she watched us. I felt a warmth in my chest knowing that I was no longer just a boyfriend to her. I had evolved into a partner and a father figure, nurturing the lives around me with kindness, patience, and a whole lot of love. When the project finally reached completion, the sense of accomplishment was palpable. The day we unveiled the finished car was nothing short of magical. Jenna and Max jumped up and down, their faces lit with astonished delight as we took a family picture beside the newly restored vehicle. However, with this joy came an underlying anxiety rooted in my mind. Would they expect the same kind of effort and commitment forever? What if life became too busy, or what if the bond we had nurtured began to unravel? I discussed these uncertainties with Rachel one quiet evening when the kids were snugly tucked in. We illuminated the room with soft light, a warm cup of tea in hand, and she shared a reassuring sentiment. "It's normal to worry," she said, resting her head on my shoulder. "But remember, it's not about the cars or the crafts. It's about creating a space where they feel valued and supported, whether it's with paintbrushes or just by listening to their hopes. They'll remember the love, not just the projects." Her words resonated deep within me, and I realized she was right. These kids, Jenna and Max, were resilient and adaptive, just as life would need them to be. My role wasn't to guarantee a perfect scenario constantly but rather to be their constant support through life's uncertainties. As days turned to months, I witnessed their confidence blossom, not just in their abilities with mechanics but also in their schoolwork and friendships. They naturally began taking leadership roles among their classmates, eagerly engaging in school projects. Each time they tackled a new challenge, I felt a surge of pride that they might carry the values we cultivated through our weekend car projects into the rest of their lives, providing a sense of direction only strengthened by the love we built together. Reflecting on this journey, I found clarity in accepting my title as dad in their lives, embracing the role with open arms. As winter approached, and car maintenance became less frequent, we shifted our focus to indoor projects. Jigsaw puzzles and game nights filled the house with energy. The old car stood proudly outside, an emblem of our collective achievements and the dawning of a familial bond that felt everlasting. I often pondered the future but found comfort in knowing that our legacy would consist of more than material objects. It would be woven with the stories of resilience, compassion, and unwavering support that would carry us through any trials that lay ahead. Update: fast forward several years, and the old car became a treasured memento. Jenna and Max took it to prom with their friends, painted stars on the roof, and filled it with memories I knew would last them a lifetime. And as Rachel and I watched them drive off into the night, her hands securely clasped in mine, I felt overwhelming gratitude for every moment, good and bad, that had brought us here, a beautifully imperfect family, ready to face the world together, one adventure at a time. It was during one of those sunny Saturday mornings, where the golden light streamed through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the coffee maker and the half-eaten croissants on the table, that I found myself embroiled in an unexpected argument with my sister, Anna. I had always thought of my sister as a free spirit, the kind of person who danced to her own tune, but that morning revealed a side of her I struggled to comprehend. Anna had recently moved to a small, picturesque town after marrying a local artist, and this new life appeared to be flourishing in its own quirky way. We were enjoying our usual brunch when she casually revealed her plans for her 5-year-old daughter, Molly. I think it's really important for her to be immersed in her heritage, you know? I want her to learn Spanish, to speak it fluently before English, she said, as she sipped her herbal tea, her expression blissfully unaware of the storm brewing within me. I paused mid-bite, a piece of croissant almost falling from my lips as my fork hovered between the plate and my mouth. But why not both? I asked, incredulous. It's a great idea to be bilingual, but why skip English? This is America, she'll need that language to thrive. Anna looked at me as if I had just suggested burning her favorite art piece. Why is teaching her English so critical? Spanish is part of our identity. I want her to embrace that. It was the kind of statement that cut deeper than I anticipated, and I felt a flicker of anger rising in my chest. You know what, Anna? You're insane if you think this is going to work out. You're limiting her future for the sake of cultural stubbornness. The air thickened with tension, the clinking of plates becoming the only sound filling the silence between us as I realized I had crossed a line. There was a moment, just a fragile glimpse, where I could see the hurt in her eyes, and for the first time, I worried that I might lose my sister to something bigger than I could fathom. The two of us, sitting across from each other in that sun-drenched kitchen, felt as if we were standing on opposite shores of a growing chasm. I chased away the rising guilt with a sharp breath, but it only intensified. Anna didn't respond right away. Instead, she set her teacup down with deliberate care, as if to gather her thoughts. The hurt morphed into quieter frustration. You think English is the only way she can succeed, that language alone defines her capabilities? You should know better than anyone how important it is for me to raise her, not just in one culture but in many. I struggled to understand her perspective. True, our upbringing had been steeped in the traditions of our Spanish-speaking family, but this was different. This was an entirely isolated approach to raising a child. Anna, it's not just about language, it's about breaking down barriers in society, especially in this digital age, I reasoned. What will happen when she tries to engage with her peers? She can have that heritage without shutting out other avenues. Her face tightened, and in a voice barely above a whisper, she responded, I'm not shutting anything out. I'm opening doors to her roots, and if you can't see the importance of that, then I don't know what to say. I felt the prick of tears in my eyes, frustration mixed with my instinct to defend not only my view but the future of a child I adored. The brunch devolved into an awkward silence punctuated only by the quiet whir of a fan in the corner, and with each passing second, I feared we were creating a rift that would never heal. I finally broke the silence. I just don't want you to mess this up, Anna. She deserves the best of both worlds. I couldn't read her expression. It was like peering into a fog. She sighed deeply and stood up, indicating brunch was over. Maybe you don't understand parenting as I do, and that's okay, but we have different views, and you're not going to change my mind, she said, her voice steady yet filled with a sadness I felt deep in my own heart. As I left her house that day, I felt a multitude of emotions swirling inside me, guilt, concern, and confusion. Were my intentions right, or had I imposed my own fears onto her parenting style instead of supporting her choices? In the weeks that followed, I distanced myself, trying to think through the layers of our conversation while giving her the time she needed. Yet, messages went unanswered, calls were left unreturned, and soon, I felt like a ghost haunting the corners of her new life. Days turned into weeks, and I watched from afar as Anna shared snippets of Molly's milestones on social media. Photos showed her twirling in a dress, speaking to her friends exclusively in Spanish, interspersed with family gatherings where laughter and warmth were evident. Yet still, there was an absence I couldn't shake. I missed being part of something so vital. The turning point came when I received a surprise text from Anna one afternoon. Can you come over? Molly wants to share something with you. I felt a surge of hope and anxiety as I drove to her house. Once there, I saw Molly sitting cross-legged on the floor, her bright eyes lighting up when she spotted me. "Auntie, I want to show you my new story. I wrote it in Spanish." Her enthusiasm was infectious. She pulled out a crayon and paper, presenting a series of drawings alongside Spanish words. Overwhelmed with emotion, I took a seat beside her, helping to read the words as she beamed with pride. In that moment, I could see how my sister's choice was shaping her daughter's identity. Yes, the importance of balance remained essential to me, but this was not the end of the world I feared it would be. It was a beginning. I turned to Anna, who was watching us with a soft smile, clearly happy to see our bond rekindle. "You know, maybe I miscalculated, but Molly should learn everything she can," I confessed. "I guess you're not insane, after all. Just passionate." Anna laughed, a joyful sound that filled the air. "Let's teach her English together, shall we?" As we sat together, sketching bilingual stories alongside a bright girl full of dreams, I felt a weight lift. It was in this shared experience that I realized understanding often grows from the seeds of difference, and sometimes, the best way to support someone you love is to embrace their choices, even when the logic of it doesn't fully resonate. In the months that passed, we built bridges back to each other, teaching Molly the values of her heritage and the languages of the world. And while we might not have agreed on everything, that day marked the beginning of a journey, one where we would each learn the language of love, compassion, and acceptance anew. Update: a month later, Anna sent me a video of Molly confidently reciting a children's song in both Spanish and English. She was proud, and so was I. We had found a balance together, and our family felt more united than ever. I knew, without a doubt, that every shade of culture and every word woven together contributes to a tapestry worth cherishing, one that we would continue to nurture hand in hand. As the weeks rolled on after that pivotal day, it felt like a weight had been lifted not just from Anna's shoulders but from our entire family. The tension that had once loomed over our gatherings evaporated, replaced by laughter and warmth that echoed through our living room during those weekend visits. I remember one particular Saturday vividly. The sun shone bright through the kitchen window as Anna prepared an elaborate brunch, her hands busy mixing batter for pancakes while the faint sound of children's laughter danced in the air. Molly, with her little apron tied around her waist, was beaming as she helped her mom, her small fingers smudged with flour, following along in a spattering of Spanish and English. Anna had started incorporating both languages into their routine, making it a fun game instead of an obligation. I watched them together, my heart swelling with joy at how far we had come. I had made it a point to join in and read picture books with Molly, choosing stories that were beautifully rich in both languages, and encouraging her to express her thoughts freely about them, as if we were weaving together our own little storytelling sessions soaked in bilingual charm. Yet, despite these nurturing moments, I still grappled with lingering worries about Anna's earlier stance on language. The implications of what had happened hung around like an old ghost. I often found myself questioning whether we'd truly harmonized our approach or if this newfound balance was temporary, a gentle breeze during a fragile season. One evening, after a family dinner filled with discussions and dreams, I felt compelled to broach that topic with Anna once more. We settled on the worn couch, the evening calming us into a cozy stillness as I leaned into the conversation. "Do you ever think about how your perspective has changed? About all the things you once believed?" I asked gently, taking care to keep my tone inviting. She paused, her brow furrowed in thought. "I do," she finally said, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. I realize now that I was so desperate to hold on to our heritage, to shield her from the chaos of navigating two worlds, that I forgot how beautiful it could be to embrace both. It's like I was seeing a colorful sunrise through a foggy window. Her words struck me, resonating deeply. Our discussion flowed effortlessly as Anna shared how she had once feared that introducing English might dilute their vibrant Spanish traditions, but now she saw it as a way to enhance them. I admired her willingness to grow, to recognize that the act of sharing languages could amplify their family bond rather than divide it. This was indeed a lesson in resilience and love. I could see it shimmering in her eyes, a twinkle that hinted at a fresh beginning. As we spoke, the world outside seemed to fade away, the evening air soothing and infused with the scent of lingering spices from dinner. We reminisced about our childhood, the laughter, the chaos, the little moments that reminded us of why family was so important. It all felt so raw and real, like a warmth spreading through my veins. As we concluded our heartfelt late-night talk, something in me felt lighter, like the fog was finally lifting in my own perception of our family dynamics. A few weeks later, my phone buzzed while I was having my morning coffee. It was another video from Anna. I pressed play, and there was our little Molly again, this time standing proudly on a small makeshift stage, a stuffed bear in her arms as she sang a medley of both languages, her voice sweet and innocent. The audience? Her dolls lined up as if they were the most enthusiastic fans in the world. "Look, it's our bilingual superstar," Anna texted alongside the video. Tears brimmed in my eyes as I watched the pure joy radiating from her tiny frame. Little did we realize it then, but we weren't merely teaching Molly, she was teaching us right back how to live freely within a melting pot of culture and language. You see, each day became a chance not just to express ourselves but to intertwine our journeys and uplift one another in the simplest yet most profound of ways. And now, as the memory of that vibrant Saturday whirled through my mind, I realized how much that journey had changed me too. Anna and I had discovered something precious, that communication and understanding go far beyond words. They were the true essence of family, of our shared stories, and the love that bound us tighter than any language ever could. I felt a sense of fulfillment as I recalled our earlier struggles, now merely stepping stones in the sprawling path of our family's narrative. Life may continue to throw challenges our way, but with each passing day, we would face them together, weaving the tapestry of language, love, and acceptance, even stronger. And perhaps one day, I would find the courage to share with Anna how inspiring this journey has been for me, how in cherishing both languages, we have built a legacy of love that I hope Molly passes on, in whichever language her heart chooses to sing. As the days gradually turned into weeks, our family dynamic transformed in ways I never fully anticipated. Evenings, once marked by tension and miscommunication, became vibrant sessions filled with laughter and playful banter, where the rhythmic cadences of both Spanish and English flowed freely around the dining table. Molly's bright smile seemed to radiate warmth as she whimsically switched between languages, eagerly explaining her day to us in a delightful mix that left Anna and me chuckling, wondering in awe at the incredible adaptability of a child's mind. There were moments, like when we jointly read her favorite story, the familiar characters dancing off the pages in both languages, that deepened my understanding of how multifaceted childhood can be, revealing layers of creativity and imagination I had always regarded as intangible until I witnessed it bloom before my eyes. Yet, woven into this delicate tapestry were the threads of occasional misunderstandings. For instance, during a family gathering, Molly inadvertently called her cousin a taco, meaning silly in Spanish, while aiming for the English word goof, sending the whole room into a fit of laughter, but also sparking a hushed moment of confusion as the adults exchanged bemused glances. It was these small mishaps that reminded us of the beautiful chaos interlaced through language learning, an essence not just of acquiring words, but also of forging connections despite missteps. I found myself reflecting on our own childhood lives as I watched Molly interact. Anna and I had faced our share of complexity, each entangled in our unique cultural roots, yet we had always hoped to unite those roots for her, not recognizing at first that our differences were exactly what could bring us closer together. One serene Sunday afternoon, while seated on the patio with my sketchbook brimming with wildflowers, I decided to pen a letter to Anna, one that expressed my gratitude for her resilience, for embracing the quirks of our evolving family dynamics, and for the lessons I had learned through her determination to keep our heritage alive in Molly's heart. It felt vital to communicate my thoughts, hoping to illuminate the bond we were growing not just as sisters, but as allies in this journey of parenthood. With each word, I sought to capture the essence of our melding cultures, striving to refine my expressions, oftentimes whispering them gently to the wind before transferring them on paper, hoping they carried the warmth of my affection. Once the letter was complete, I read it to myself, letting the sentiments wash over me like a soothing balm. When I finally shared it with Anna, her eyes widened, sparkled, and then softened, gratitude spilling from her voice as she hugged me tightly, almost as if the weight of our prior disagreement slipped away along with her exhale. In time, I gathered the courage to voice my thoughts about how this journey had helped me learn to appreciate all shades of language, an awakening that fueled newfound passion within myself, whispering to Anna how our commitment to communicate with love and understanding had reshaped the very fabric of our family. We agreed that we were forging a unique identity, nestled between our cultures, where the love we shared cared less about keeping score on which language was spoken when, and more about the emotional resonance behind every word, how a simple gracias could hold as much heart as thank you. This perspective brought us further together, allowing me to breathe easier in the warm embrace of our joint aspirations for Molly. As the seasons shifted, I often caught glimpses of Molly giggling with her friends, blending her playful banter, reminiscent of a little polyglot conquering the world with every cheerful note. One particularly vibrant afternoon, she elatedly invited her friends over for an impromptu language day in our backyard, where they huddled around crayons and paper, inspiration struck, and a flurry of illustrations of their favorite things burst forth, words fluttering between language borders like butterflies setting free. It struck me in that moment how these budding relationships would someday define her place in the world, building bridges and embracing differences with an open heart. I felt something shift inside, a blossoming of hope and a profound commitment to being a supportive figure in her life, as I knew deeply that no matter where her journey led her, we would be there as her unwavering support. Looking back now, the journey we embarked on was not merely about language, it shaped the pillars of our familial relationship, showing us the incredible strength found in vulnerability, teaching us that acceptance isn't always about being right or wrong, but rather about cultivating an environment filled with compassion and open-ended questions, nurturing apples from both our trees, allowing them to grow together in a delightful orchard. Those initial struggles now felt like whispered lullabies, reminding me of the beauty residing within patience, and as I closed my eyes at night, I felt a sense of peace wrap around me like a cozy blanket, grateful for the families we've built through honesty and love, knowing that this was just the beginning of a brighter story unfolding before us. I never thought I would find myself in the midst of such chaos, but there I was, sitting on the edge of my bed before the door swung open and my best friend, Clara, rushed in, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and panic. It was a rainy Wednesday, the kind of day that makes you want to curl up with a book and forget the world outside, but today was different. Today marked 3 months since Clara's boyfriend, Ryan, had walked out, leaving her broken-hearted and desperate for answers that I had a sinking feeling she would never find. For years, I had stood by her through this tumultuous journey of love and heartache, but the truth was that I'd grown tired of her constant excuses, of the way she seemed to repeatedly brush aside her culpability in the relationship's unraveling to cling to her victim narrative. Ryan had been a good man, scrupulously faithful, but I'd watched the way Clara would flirt with him during parties, the subtle yet unmistakable invitations that would lead to late-night phone calls where she would complain about how distant he had become. I felt the weight of my own silence pressing down on me, which was why, on that rainy evening, when Clara burst into my room, I finally found the words I had been holding back for months. "Clara, can we talk?" I asked gently, hoping to soften the blow. As the words left my mouth, I felt a storm brewing within me. It was time to address the elephant in the room, no matter how much I dreaded what might unfold. Clara plopped herself onto my bed, a worn-out tear-streaked pillow held tightly against her chest as she anxiously ran her fingers through her tousled hair. "I just can't understand why he left, you know? I did everything for him," she lamented, her voice thick with helplessness. I looked into her eyes, swimming with confusion, and wondered how many times I had already fed her excuses, how many nights I had indulged her tales of woe without ever once saying what I really thought. "Maybe if you had just," I started, my voice betraying my hesitation, but she interrupted me with a wave of her hand. "What? If I had just what? Let him do whatever he wanted while I sat on the sidelines watching?" The accusation hung in the air like a heavy fog. It was then I understood I had to tread carefully. "Clara," I said slowly, choosing my words with as much care as I could. "I think if you hadn't always tried to get with him, maybe he wouldn't have left you." The moment the words spilled out, the tension crackled like electricity between us. Clara's expression morphed from hurt to outrage. I could almost see the gears turning in her mind as she struggled to process my blunt honesty. "How could you say that? You're my best friend. Aren't you supposed to support me?" I felt a wave of guilt wash over me, but it was quickly replaced by a lingering urge to defend my stance. I reminded myself that friendship sometimes required uncomfortable truths, sometimes it meant risking the bond for something more substantial. "I am supporting you, but it feels like you've never truly seen how your actions have affected your relationships. It's not just about what Ryan did, it's about us taking accountability too." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken words. Clara's gaze fell to her lap, and for a moment, I thought I'd lost her for good. It was then she looked back up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It was a look of vulnerability that I had rarely seen. "Maybe you're right," she whispered, almost too quietly to hear. "Maybe I need to reevaluate how I treat the people I love." I felt an unexpected relief wash over me. Often, the hardest conversations turn out to be the most necessary. We spent the rest of the evening talking in quiet tones, not eliminating the possibility of her feelings but rather exploring them, digging into the roots of her behavior. Each shared memory seemed to stitch us back together, slowly mending the cracks that had begun to spread between us. Weeks passed, and as Clara began to explore some of her choices in therapy, I too found myself reflecting on our friendship. It became clear to me that I hadn't only been a friend to Clara, I had also held onto her anger to shield my own insecurities. I called Ryan one evening, just to check in, and surprisingly, he was open to talking. He spoke about how difficult the breakup had been for him, acknowledging the tension between the three of us. It was strange to see another person's hurt mirrored in my own thoughts. After all, hadn't all of this stemmed from a place of miscommunication? Maybe we all had a part to play in this tangled web. In the end, our friendships deepened but morphed into something new. Clara found solace in a different place of strength, and Ryan began to explore his own journey of healing. And me? I learned that sometimes addressing uncomfortable truths is a pathway to a better understanding of ourselves and the relationships we value the most. Months later, when I invited Clara to talk again, I could tell we were two friends who had survived a storm together. "You know," she said with a wistful smile. "That was a real turning point, wasn't it?" I nodded, feeling the warmth between us, the shared strength formed through honesty and confrontation, a bond that, while bruised, had somehow been made stronger. And maybe, just maybe, we would find our way back to laughter and light, as friendships are prone to do. I sat with her in that quiet moment, reflecting on how rain often gives way to the sun. The experience wasn't just about blame or regret, it was a hard lesson in growth, empathy, and the importance of holding each other accountable as we navigate this unpredictable thing called love. The silence lingered, comfortable yet heavy, as we both processed everything that had been said. I glanced out the window, noticing the rain had finally ceased. It felt like a metaphor for our turbulent conversation, a storm that had passed, leaving behind a kind of clarity. "You know," I said softly, breaking the quiet, "you might not want to hear this, but part of me is glad this happened." Her eyebrows furrowed in confusion, and I quickly added, "Not because of the pain, but because it forced us to confront the things we usually sweep under the rug." She turned to me, her expression softening as she nodded, a hint of understanding dancing in her eyes. We were two souls tangled in a web of relationships, me, the one who had tried to help her see where her actions were leading, and her, the one who had, perhaps unknowingly, steered her life into choppy waters. We spoke for hours, delving into her relationship with Jake, her boyfriend, and the heartache that had been crippling her since he left. I listened as she recounted the moments that led to their unraveling, the desperation to feel wanted battling against the impulses that drove her to seek affirmation in places it didn't belong. "Every time I thought about you and Tyler laughing together, it made me feel like I was missing something," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It was an admission filled with vulnerable honesty that echoed in the quiet of my living room, sinking into the spaces where judgment had dissolved. As our conversation unfolded, I realized that not only was I trying to disentangle her from her own thoughts, but perhaps also from my lingering resentment over how her actions had affected my life. Eventually, the air shifted from confrontation to appreciation, as she thanked me for pushing her to see the reality of her choices. "You saved me from myself, you know that?" she said, her voice laced with gratitude. I felt a surge of warmth at her acknowledgement, a soothing balm on the wounds that had formed from the conflict. "Sometimes you need someone to be honest with you, even if it stings," I replied, wishing she understood how difficult it had been for me to say the words I had spoken. The evening wore on, and with every moment we shared, the shadows of our past began to recede, illuminating the path before us. On a whim, I suggested we consider starting a book club together, something that had been a long-standing joke between us. The idea was met with a laugh, and just like that, we transitioned from heavy-hearted discussions to playful banter about what books we might choose. It was a brilliant revelation, the whimsical notion of stories to share and discuss drawing us back into the familiar rhythm of our friendship, leaving our deeper troubles behind, if only for a moment. As the night wore on, I felt the worry of aftermath slowly lift, maybe the storm had truly passed. I turned off the lights, wrapping us both in the cozy familiarity of warm blankets and the faint scent of chamomile tea wafting through the air. It was in those shared breaths, wrapped in comfort, laughter, and the reverberating echoes of our goodbyes to hurt, that I finally dared to hope. Perhaps building back our friendship wouldn't just be a chore, but an adventure, one step at a time. After all, every story of conflict can lead to new beginnings. When I later wrote my post on the AITA thread, I framed it not just around the tumult of those moments but also around the evolution of our bond. It truly is a testament to how love, in all its forms, can ultimately rise from the very ashes of pain. And as I hit submit, I felt a wave of catharsis wash over me, a sense of closure for what had been. The comments that followed, filled with support and shared stories, became a living testament to the resilience of relationships, no matter how strained they may become. Hours later, as I finally drifted off to sleep, I clung to the thought that even the heaviest rainstorms make way for the brightest dawns, and perhaps this new dawn was the beginning of something beautiful for both of us. As I slipped into the soft embrace of sleep, my mind swirled with hopeful visions of the days to come, where laughter would find its way back into our conversations and the lingering shadows of doubt would fade into a distant memory. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, casting delicate patterns on the floor, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I awoke with a sense of peace that seemed to linger just outside my consciousness, waiting to be acknowledged. I reached for my phone, half expecting a cascade of notifications, but found only a solitary message from Sarah, my best friend. It read simply, "Can we talk?" I could sense the apprehension in those 3 words, a quiet echo of all the unsaid apologies hanging between us. While I was eager to engage, I also felt a tightening in my chest at the thought of another difficult conversation. What would I say? Did I even know how to approach it? Taking a deep breath, I replied with a tentative, "Of course, when and where?" We decided to meet at our favorite cafe, a small, cozy place adorned with whimsical decor and the intoxicating aroma of fresh pastries. Arriving a bit early, I perched on a low stool, my heart thudding in anticipation of what would unfold. When she walked in, she appeared almost ethereal, the sunlight catching the strands of her hair, framing her face like a soft halo. Yet, beneath that radiant exterior, I recognized the shadows of uncertainty etched in her expression. She slid into the seat across from me, and we exchanged hesitant smiles, as if testing the waters after a storm. "I'm really sorry," Sarah began, her voice shaky but sincere. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about how selfish I was, and I don't know how I let it get that far." I wanted to jump in, to assure her that we would be okay, but something inside urged me to let her voice her feelings first. "So," I nodded, prompting her to continue. "It's just. I guess I wanted what you had, without realizing the toll it would take on our friendship." "I know I hurt you," she said, her eyes glistening. There was pain in her words, a raw honesty that cut through the layers of our past. I felt something within me soften as I listened. It dawned on me just how much she had been struggling with her insecurities, having always looked up to the love I shared with my husband. "You were caught in a fantasy, just as I was," I replied softly. "It's hard to separate our desires from reality, and trust me, I've had my fair share of doubts. I thought things would always be perfect, but things change." We talked for hours, layers of misunderstanding peeled away like the soft petals of a spring blossom, revealing the roots of our friendship still intact beneath the surface. It felt refreshing to vent, to listen, and to empathize as we shared our past victories and losses, reinforcing how we had each found ourselves longing for something we had overlooked, the prioritization of our friendship over fleeting moments of jealousy or neglect. As time slipped by, I felt a sense of healing course through me. It wasn't just about reconciling our pasts but also about understanding the deeper roots of our connection. By the time we reached the end of our coffee, I felt as if we had created a new layer in our bond, more resilient than before. "So, what now?" I asked as we gathered our things, feeling light. "I think we should take it slow, just focus on being us again," she mused. "Let's just hang out, like we used to without any complications." I grinned, surprised at the weight that had lifted between us. We had learned a hard lesson together, one I hoped would keep us stronger and more connected moving forward. In the days that followed, we slowly began to rebuild our friendship. We went for runs by the river, where we laughed until our sides hurt, cooking together on the weekends, and even picking out movies to binge on lazy afternoons. Each gathering felt therapeutic, stitching together the frayed edges of our lives. I also saw how she began to take a step back from seeking validation in the attention of others and focused more on nourishing her self-worth. It was inspiring, and I felt grateful to witness her growth. Pain, it turned out, was not the end of our journeys but merely a pit stop on the way to something extraordinary. And with each passing day, the sunlight grew brighter, reminding me of how our lives could soften and reshape after a heavy rainstorm. As for my marriage, that too started to flourish. My husband had come to understand the weight of the situation, and we worked on cultivating stronger communication, prioritizing our bond in a way that honored its foundation. Perhaps we were all just learning how to navigate the complexities of love, friendship, and desire, an ongoing journey where every misstep could lead to enlightening perspectives. The day came when I found myself pouring out my heart again in another Reddit post, this time sharing the beautiful progress we had made, casting a brighter light on the lessons of accountability and unconditional support. "We're all flawed," I wrote, "but Embracing each other's flaws can lead to something even more beautiful. It was cathartic, feeling the words tumble out freely, no longer burdened by resentment but buoyed by hope. As I hit submit, I looked out the window at the dawn breaking over the horizon, the colors blending seamlessly together, and for a moment, it felt like I was standing at the brink of an adventure, one built on healing and sincerity. What followed was a stream of encouraging comments and heartfelt messages from fellow Redditors who had experienced their own journeys of reconciliation, and they reminded me that the most difficult paths can lead to unexpected destinations, the small moments of joy, the laughter shared over coffee, and the deepening of true friendship. Just as I had hoped, the rain had brought forth a new dawn, and now, with each gentle wave of connection that rolled in, I understood that sometimes, the darkest storms create the most stunning landscapes. It was a quiet Tuesday evening when my life transformed into something out of a bizarre thriller, but let's backtrack a little to understand how I arrived at that moment. My name is Sarah, and I've been working as a psychiatric nurse in a small community hospital for nearly 5 years now. The setting is familiar. I often find myself in the serene yet eerie halls filled with soft whispers of patients sharing their stories, some poignant, others filled with shadows. Among them was a patient named Mike, a young man with a troubled past, a low, hypnotic voice, and a peculiar magnetism that drew me in despite the unsettling aura that seemed to follow him. I had been his primary nurse during his long stay on the ward, forging a connection that I thought was entirely professional, though there was an uneasiness at the back of my mind, an occasional flicker of something unspoken lingering in our conversations. Mike was charming in a way that felt almost dangerous. He possessed an uncanny ability to make you feel understood, even as he recounted his thoughts about paranoia and delusion. When he was discharged after several months of treatment, I should have felt relieved, but there was something there, a weight that wouldn't lift. Fast forward to the notorious night. I had just come home after a long shift, the kind of exhaustion that clings to your bones, when I found my front door slightly ajar. A chill scampered down my spine as I stepped inside, whispering to myself that I was merely tired. But as I settled into my living room, relief began to wash over me. That was when I heard it, a soft knock, almost hesitant, on my back door leading to the patio. Peeking through the curtain, my heart stumbled into my throat when I saw Mike standing there, soaked from the rain, an unsettling grin plastered on his face. My instinct was to call the police, but when he saw me through the glass, he pressed his face closer, eyes wild yet pleading, and somehow, I found myself opening the door to let him in. "Sarah, I need your help. They've been watching me," he breathlessly insisted, and my stomach churned at the raw desperation in his voice. I tried to assess the situation, but each word he spoke wrapped tighter around my heart, squeezing it painfully. I offered him a towel and closed the door behind him, suddenly realizing that I was no longer in control. The conversation turned frantic as Mike began recounting tales that fluctuated between reality and what I could only describe as delusions. "They're coming for you, too," he said, the fervor in his gaze intensifying, sending my mind spiraling. It was all surreal, like a waking nightmare, but I couldn't lose my composure. A mix of fear and a sense of duty compelled me to remain calm and keep him talking, analyzing his narrative while discreetly dialing 911, hoping for the cavalry to arrive and back me up. With every word, I could see the shadows shift within his eyes. He was losing touch. As he leaned closer, analyzing me with an intensity that felt both intimate and threatening, I started to feel trapped. Then came the breaking point. In an abrupt twist, Mike's demeanor shifted once again, and he lunged towards my phone that I had clutched tightly. His grip was eerily strong as he knocked it from my hand, sending it sliding across the floor and breaking the connection I so desperately needed. Panic surged within me, the invisible chains of therapy weaving tight. Was this the same man I had tried to help? I started backing away slowly, hoping to create some distance, but as he followed, something remarkable happened. In a flash of humanity, I saw that sparkle of hurt in his eyes, the frightened boy behind the facade of madness. Just as he reached out to me, my front door burst open, framing 2 police officers silhouetted against the porch light, their presence slicing through the tension like a knife. "Step away from her," one commanded, gun drawn, and it all unfolded in a whirlwind as Mike stepped back from me, confusion marring his once clear expression. In that moment, the room was encapsulated with a heavy silence, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of your own heartbeat. Eventually, they escorted Mike away, his eyes barely meeting mine, and I could see the threads of both my fear and his despair taut between us. Alone soon after, a warm breeze swept through the house as I processed everything. It's strange, the tangled emotions that wrapped around that night. Perhaps I could have helped him more, Perhaps he was lost long before he ever entered my life. Days faded into weeks, and with every passing moment, I found myself caught in a loop of reflection. It wasn't just Mike's unraveling that haunted me, it was me questioning what I could have done differently. It was only later, after everything settled down, that I received a letter in the mail marked from the treatment facility, mentioning my old patient's unexpected exit from the program and his ongoing recovery. I read it multiple times, trying to decipher if my heart should feel relief or dread. Perhaps there's more to the story than I will ever know. The letter finished with a reminder: don't forget the humanity behind those stories. As unsettling as that experience was, there was an important part that remained clear: I cared for Mike, and I hoped someday he might care for himself again. Life moved on, but sometimes, in the quiet of the night, the thoughts swirl back, bringing along the echoes of a voice I used to know and the strange bond we forged in the unkindest circumstances, reminding me of the thin line we all walk between sanity and chaos, compassion and fear. It was 3 weeks later, a balmy Thursday evening, when I found myself working late in the clinic, the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock echoing through the otherwise quiet halls. I was closing up, the last few charts filed away, the fluorescent lights buzzing dimly above me like a flock of restless moths. The night was calm, almost too calm, and I was just about to slip my keys into my bag when I felt a chill creep down my spine. I dismissed it as a figment. After all, I had just spent a long day navigating through the delicate balance of life stories, from the elderly woman who knitted memories into her blankets to the teenager grappling with the weight of the world's expectations. Yet, as I stood there in the solitude of the clinic, that nagging sense of being watched gnawed at me. I shook it off, reminding myself that confidence in my closed space usually brought comfort. I took a deep breath and stepped outside, the warmth of the evening air wrapping around me like a cocoon, but the unease didn't fade. As I walked to my car, my thoughts wandered back to my time with Mike. I often wondered how he was coping, whether he had made any improvements since our last session. There was something hauntingly beautiful about the way hope intertwined with despair in his journey, and despite everything, I longed for him to find his way back to himself. Just as I fumbled for my keys, my phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from an unknown number. My heart raced as I opened it. "You should come and see me soon. I miss you, M." My breath hitched. Memories flooded back, the way Mike's eyes would glisten when he found a spark of interest in our sessions, the laughter we shared during the brief moments of levity, how close we had come to breaking through the thick fog that clouded his reality. But that same attachment, that flicker of connection, left me on high alert. I shouldn't respond, I thought, reminding myself of the boundaries my profession mandated. I should just delete it. Yet, as I hovered over the delete button, the pulse of reminiscence thrummed in my chest, igniting an impulse to reply just to see if it was indeed him. I paused and then put my phone back in my pocket, deciding to let go before I tangled myself in something I could no longer control. But as I turned the key in the ignition and the engine roared to life, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. 2 nights later, while I was enjoying a quiet evening with a book, a sudden knock at my door made my heart leap. My golden retriever, Bailey, barked fiercely, a protective instinct radiating from him as I hurried to the door. Peering through the peephole, I felt my stomach drop. Standing there was Mike, looking disheveled and desperate, more like a ghost than the man I once knew. Panic surged through me. I was not ready for this. I contemplated calling for help, but a part of me whispered to give him a chance. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. There he stood, his eyes wild, hair unkempt, and it was the rawness of his expression that broke my heart. "I need your help," he said, his voice a raspy whisper that dripped with urgency, and before I could react, he reached for my arm, pulling me closer. Bailey barked even louder, but I felt rooted to the spot, caught in Mike's gaze. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me, but I couldn't wait any longer." I motioned for him to step inside, a swirling storm of confusion and concern battling inside me. We moved to the living room, where I offered him a seat, my heart thudding as I tried to process what was happening. The familiar weight of compassion and fear settled heavily on my chest as he recounted the fragments of his story, the slip-ups and setbacks, the nights spent wrestling with his demons. I listened, feeling the mixture of heartbreak and a strange thrill of familiarity wash over me. He was treading a dark path, yet there was a flicker of genuine longing in his eyes, a desperate need for connection that reminded me of those old sessions, the times we'd laughed amid the shadows. But then things took a turn as Mike's demeanor shifted, and I could see the tension coil tight within him. "They're coming for me," he said abruptly, his voice dropping to a hush. "They think I did something really bad. But I didn't. You have to believe me." The shift felt like the ground had pulled out from under my feet. Who, Mike? Who's coming for you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, sensing the fear that washed over him in waves. That's when he revealed the depths of paranoia he had sunk into. He believed that shadows were stalking him, that people from his past were waiting for a moment to snatch him away, and somehow, I was caught up in the whirlwind of it. As he spoke, I could hear the clattering of a brief explanation at the edge of his consciousness, a plan formed out of despair, tied to the letters he'd sent me in those chaotic moments. I realized with growing unease that the very warmth I associated with compassion had now become a vessel for his tangled necessity. I began to dream about how quickly things could spiral. I could replace sympathy with guilt as easily as he tried to pull me into his storm. Yet, I saw the man I once had hoped for trapped beneath wild misinterpretations. Just as I opened my mouth to quell his fears, to reassure him that he was safe here, I heard a rustling outside. Someone was approaching. Mike's eyes darted to the window with a raw panic, and that's when everything escalated. The shadows that lingered in his stories materialized, and his fear became tangible. He sprang from his seat, eyes wide and desperate, grabbing my hand with a grip so tight it almost hurt. We have to go. They're here, and if they find me. His words trailed off, but the urgency in his voice sliced through the air like a blade. I hesitated, caught in the tumult of emotions, but the moment felt surreal, as if time warped around us. The serenity of the evening had twisted into a throbbing tension. Mike, wait. We need to figure this out together. You can't just run without a plan, I urged, trying to keep my voice steady, but he was already tugging me toward the door. They'll take you too. You have to trust me. His eyes burned with a wild light, and though every part of me shouted to resist this surge of madness, to impose rationality in the growing chaos, I found my legs moving as he pulled me into the night. I could hear the whispers of doubts layering over my thoughts, but somewhere deep down, there's something profoundly human about riding the waves of another's fear, an inclination to follow their storm, to understand the depths of despair where only darkness seemed to lie. The echoing footsteps haunted our steps as we dashed down the street. It felt surreal, almost as if we were characters spun from a tale of desperation, and yet beneath all that, there was an unyielding rush of adrenaline, a glimpse of a path forged from compassion tangled within a web of confusion. I wanted to save him, but in that moment, perhaps I was just trying to save myself too. Looking back, the frantic breaths began to remind me of an unanswerable question hovering around our heads: were we running toward liberation or entrapping ourselves deeper in the labyrinth we feared? Then, as if summoned by the force of our shared panic, headlights cut through the darkness like knives, illuminating the street behind us. I felt Mike's grip tighten on my wrist, his breath hitching as we turned to face the sudden glow. A car rolled to a stop, the engine humming like a predator revving its throat. My heart raced, and then time seemed to freeze as I braced myself for whatever came next. Almost instinctively, I stepped slightly in front of Mike, protective from a threat I couldn't yet see, my body caught in a familiar rhythm of the caregiver within, acting even when fear gripped my mind. Mike, I breathed, trying to keep my voice firm, we need to plan, think this through. But he shook his head violently, eyes wide with fear, ready to bolt again. I could see a storm flicker in his eyes as he made the decision for both of us. I felt a heavy weight pressing against my throat as I realized, compassion's lane had transformed into a crossroads of uncertainty. The truth began to unfold, perhaps we both needed saving. The car door swung open, and a figure stepped out, their silhouette in the gleaming metal of the vehicle reflecting the fragile light of the street lamps. I could feel the grip of reality loosening in the face of a potential new beginning or terrifying end, the balance stirring in the depths of night as we stood on the precipice of the unknown. As the figure approached, I recognized the familiarity, my heart pounding in recognition that seemed too surreal amidst the chaotic backdrop. Mike, what are you doing? A voice cut through the tension, and I turned to see Dr. Stevenson, my colleague who had worked alongside me in the clinic. What was she doing here, at this hour? She seemed to sense how fraught the atmosphere was between us, shifting her weight slightly as she took a cautious step, her expression shifting from concern to focus. Let's talk, let's reason this through, she said, voice calm yet intense. Mike's breaths quickened as if he was shifting from one world to another. It suddenly dawned on me how tangled compassion could become when placed on the anvil of fear and desperation, and I felt my heart wrestle with the uncertainty unfolding before us. This was the moment where I had to grasp onto hope, where I would have to open my heart and my mind as we crossed the threshold between the known and the unknown. The unexpected meeting with Dr. Stevenson held the potential to pull Mike back from the edge, the place where I could serve as a bridge back to the light. As we stood there, suspended between fear and understanding, I noticed that compassion burned brighter than chaos, shimmering in the starlit night. It flickered uncertainly, but it illuminated the path ahead, a reminder that every tangled story holds the promise of unearthing connections that find their way through the tumult. I felt a sense of calm wash over me there in the darkened street and knew we would find our way back together, however perilous the journey ahead might seem. Perhaps that's where humanity truly lies, within the fragile grace of holding one another close, amid the chaos swirling, our hands reaching out through the night. Only then could we conquer the shadows that threaten our stories. As we turned to Dr. Stevenson, the night seemed more forgiving, and I prayed that in this moment, we could begin to untangle the fears that had led us here, towards something far more profound than madness, awakening together instead of sinking deeper into despair. The uncertainty that loomed ahead bore a strange familiarity, and I simply hoped we would find solace, for not just Mike or me, but for the stories ahead yet unseen, for every whispered echo that called for healing amongst all the chaos. In the silence that followed, the possibility flickered, grounded by the echoes of connection coursing through the night, waiting for us to embrace the humanity tethered beneath it all. As the dust settled in my mind and the warmth filled the small room around me, I reflected on everything Mike had whispered in that fleeting encounter. My shift had long ended, yet a sense of urgency gripped me, a thread that tied his words to the complexities of every interaction I'd ever had with him. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the walls in soft hues of orange and pink, and with it, I felt the weight of the world creeping back into focus. I had walked this precarious path before. There was a time when Mike, just a fragile shadow of himself, seemed completely lost, trapped in a labyrinth of thoughts too twisted for even him to navigate. But that night, where madness brushed up against illumination, I felt the tight grip of hopelessness loosen, just a bit, creating a slight crack through which I could glimpse the light. It was the small moments often overlooked that mattered most, a shared laugh that rang loud in the sterile walls of the ward, the fleeting connection in his gaze when I acknowledged him as more than just a patient, more than a puzzle I needed to solve. But as the memories danced before me, brutally reminding me of the fine line we walk between compassion and discomfort, dread began to claw its way back into my heart. What if the fragile sense of connection I felt was merely a delusion crafted by my desperate desire to help? The very thought sent a shiver down my spine. I resolved to push those questions aside. It was an old practice now, known well to the long hours of solitary reflection I'd grown accustomed to. But before I could truly quiet those nagging voices, my quiet evening was shattered by the piercing sound of my phone vibrating on the table, the screen flashing Mike's name. With trembling hands, I answered, bracing myself. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Nina?" He breathed, and in that moment, his shaky tone pulled at every empathic nerve in my body. I need help." There was a gravity there, a pull towards desperation that roused something instinctual in me to act. "Where are you, Mike?" I maintained a calm exterior, heart beating as I rushed through the options in my mind. "I don't know where I am," he stammered, and I could hear it, the panic rising, the desperate search for safety in his words. I think I'm near that old park we used to walk through." It took a moment for the weight of that realization to settle, a place that had once been so alive, filled with laughter and shaded paths, now turned into a shadow of its former self. "Mike, listen to me. Stay where you are, I'll come find you," I instructed, already scrambling to grab my keys and jacket. Each step felt heavy, yet the thought of him lost in either a physical or emotional wilderness spurred me on. When I pulled into the ghostly remnants of what had once been a lively sanctuary of tall oaks and vibrant flower beds, it felt like a scene from a forgotten story, crickets chirping a haunting lullaby, leaves rustling softly as if urging me on. It took only minutes to locate him, sitting despondently on a bench half hidden beneath the low-hanging branches. His profile was gaunt and shadowed in the open-air husk of winter, but in the dim moonlight spilling overhead, I could see the tears glittering in his eyes. "I just wanted to talk," he whispered, and my heart ached. The cold seeped through my clothes as I took a seat beside him, all the while fighting the shiver fluttering through my body, reminding me of the human connection that can exist even in the most desolate circumstances. A dialogue unfolded, several unspooled threads weaving back toward connection amidst a tangle of confessions. He spoke of the darkness threatening to consume him, but as he spoke, I found something comforting in the cracks and fissures of his voice, a raw authenticity that danced around the pain like a delicate flame. "There's something almost beautiful about feeling this lost," he murmured, and in those chilling words, I understood, it didn't change the reality of his suffering, but every emotion held a sliver of the human experience. I wanted to guide him back, to show him that clarity mingled with chaos and that we could reclaim those paths we once trod together. As the moon hung low, illuminating our faces with a ghostly glow, I reached for his hand. This time, it was him who hesitated, uncertainty etched into his expression. "You've always been kind, too kind for someone lost like me. Everything I feel is close to breaking, like I'll never learn how to navigate through this world," he said, fear rippling through his voice. "I'm afraid I might drag you down with me." "No," I said softly, realizing how much I believed in that statement. "That bond you formed with me, it doesn't weigh us down. It helps lift us up. We can find the strength to navigate despair together." Silence enveloped us, but rather than feeling empty, it felt like an embrace drawing us closer. Underneath the moon's watchful eye, we began to reconnect, to patch the frayed edges of our story, lingering not just in despair but in the beautiful, fallible nature of healing. As the night deepened and dawn beckoned from the horizon, stirring the world awake, I felt lighter. In the chaos of human connection, we discovered the tether that keeps us bound together, breathing shared humanity in a moment that could have quickly spiraled out of control. I knew we couldn't predict where this would go, but for now, it was enough to simply exist in this uncertain space, vulnerable, yet courageous, grappling with both the shadows behind us and the flickering light ahead. As I walked him home, each step a silent agreement to embrace the painful honesty of our lives, I couldn't help but feel that every whisper of pain forged a story worth sharing, inviting echoes of hope amidst the cycles of despair. And somewhere within that narrative, we might find a way forward, not just for ourselves but for the tangled voices yearning for embers of care that we all needed now more than ever. No, sleep, all my childhood bedrooms had something in common. Only now that I live alone did I realize what that was. The first time I noticed the peculiar pattern was when I stood in the center of my new apartment, a modest one-bedroom tucked snugly into the heart of the city. It was a place of my own, yet it felt eerily familiar. The walls were painted soft beige, the floor a warm wood, and the gentle hum of the city outside filled the air like a nighttime lullaby. But as I unpacked boxes and hung up my belongings, it struck me, every bedroom I had ever occupied as a child had a specific element that seemed to echo through the years. Each space had a window that faced the exact same direction, southeast. I remember as a kid, lying in bed and staring out at the clouds shifting colors as the sun set, thinking that the universe was painting portraits just for me. However, something darker lurked behind those windows, a feeling that so many moments of joy were teetering on the edge of something menacing. My parents divorced when I was 10, and I began to wonder if perhaps it wasn't just a coincidence. As my mind wandered down those troubled lanes of memory, images flashed through my mind, that old, decrepit house we lived in after the split. The peeling wallpaper, the creaky floorboards, and especially the shadows that danced in the corners whenever the sun dipped low. I could almost hear the whispers in the dark. They became companions during sleepless nights, always promising to help me, while making it clear that their comfort came at a price. With each move to a new bedroom, the shadows seemed to follow me, lurking closer each time. At first, I thought them just figments of my imagination, remnants of childhood fears stemming from my fragmented family life. Now, in my own space at 30, the memory was no longer vague. As I stood by that southeast window, I could feel a chill creeping along my spine, as if I were being beckoned back into the heart of those tales I had tried so desperately to forget. I dismissed it as mere nostalgia, but then came the whisper, just faint enough to trick my mind into believing it was just the wind rustling the trees. "Come play," it said, a sweet lilt that was both inviting and gut-wrenching. My hands trembled as I decided to leave my safe haven for the evening air, hoping some fresh air would ground me. Just outside, the world was alive, families, couples, friends all bridged by laughter as they mingled in the twilight. But even in a crowd, I felt wrapped in a blanket of loneliness. After a few minutes of walking, I turned and headed back to my apartment, to gather my thoughts and clear my head. The whole way home, I noticed those same wild shadows clawing at the edges of my vision, just as they had in my youth, edging closer with every step. Upon entering my small space, the silence suffocated me, every creak of the floorboards echoing in a way that made me feel less alone yet completely abandoned. I walked over to the window, the familiarity wrapping itself around me like an old coat, and realized that I was still that lonely child, trying to make sense of the world while seeking solace in forgotten corners. In an impulsive act, I decided to pull the curtain wide open, letting the moonlight spill into the room. To my shock, my heart raced at a sudden movement outside. The shadows, once whispers in the corners, pooled just beneath the window in unearthly shapes, tantalizing me with nostalgia and secrets I had long ignored. My pulse quickened, and I thought of all the times I had ignored the signs throughout my life, closing the doors on thoughts that summoned dread but also hinted at discovery. In that moment, I felt at the precipice of something monumental, a challenge to confront my past rather than flee from it. But instead of fear, I felt liberating curiosity, inviting those mysteries back into my heart. I placed a hand over the glass, feeling that odd mix of warmth and chill as I whispered softly, "What do you want from me?" The response was a gentle swell, the shadows dancing closer as if inviting me to join them. Here I was, finally ready to embrace all that I had avoided for years. About a week later, as I still sat enveloped by those night whispers, I caught a glimpse of a memory, a dream I used to have of running through an endless field, with children playing and laughing without a care. Those memories shifted like sand in an hourglass, forming new shapes in my mind. I began writing them down, detailing everything, every whisper I heard, every touch I felt in the corners of my rooms, and eventually, the truth emerged. Those shadows, which had once loomed over me as dark memories, were reminders of a childhood filled with magic. I had hidden from my feelings for far too long, but now, I was ready to turn every belief I held about my past upside down. That playful call to come play wasn't about fear, it was about reconnecting with that part of me I had buried under the weight of adult responsibilities and heartache. The closer the shadows danced, the more I saw them as potential and promise rather than threats. And like any good story, the shadows remained ever present, threading the past with my future, allowing me to weave together a narrative that made sense at last. That revelation breathed new life into my heart as I embraced the space I called home, a sanctuary full of the joys I had once known. Yet, as I finally snuffed out the light late one night, I felt a stir of energy, a soft rustling brushed against my skin. Just by following the path back to the shadows of my childhood, I discovered that they weren't gone, they were always there, waiting for me to acknowledge them, ready to share those deep, sweet secrets once again. It turns out, every childhood bedroom could be sanctified in a way if we dared to listen to the stories echoed within them. Update: I've since taken up writing again, turning my childhood tales into stories I share online. The response has been overwhelming. It seems I wasn't the only one who carried these shadows, but I've come to realize that my words breathe life into them. A small community has formed around my confessions, each of us unraveling our own histories and discovering shared experiences in those whispered moments of fear and joy. What I once thought was a burden has now become a gift, a testament to the power of storytelling and the bonds it can forge between those who dare to listen. As I sat in my dimly lit room, the soft hum of my computer the only companion aside from the shadows that danced joyfully along the walls, I began to sift through the memories that had shaped my childhood, memories that were now spilling onto the screen like ink from a well-used pen. With each tap of the keyboard, I felt a comforting release, a connection to those childhood bedrooms that had been more than just spaces where I slept. They were vessels holding pieces of my spirit, echoing with laughter, tears, secrets, and fears. In each one, there was something eerily familiar, a strange presence that, until recently, I hadn't fully acknowledged. My first room in the house on Maple Street had been the brightest, painted a cheerful yellow that caught the morning light just right, but underneath that sunny veneer, I had felt eyes watching me, always lurking in the corners where shadows mingled with stuffed animals and forgotten toys. Then, there was the small bedroom in the apartment my family moved to when I was 8, where in the middle of the night I would hear whispers from the closet, like a conversation between old friends, secrets shared only in the dark. I thought I had simply been imaginative, that I was a child prone to flights of fancy. But as I delved deeper into my past through the stories I shared online, my fellow storytellers confessed similar experiences, echoes of their own childhoods that mirrored mine, all rooted in similar anxieties and lonely nights. It began to dawn on me that perhaps what I perceived as specters of my past were, in fact, manifestations of the fears and growing pains all children experience but often bury as they transition into adulthood. Slowly, this realization morphed into a kind of solidarity among us, a shared space where we could explore our fears without judgment, where vulnerability became our strength. Each story prompted reflections on what those rooms meant to us, not just as childhood havens, but as the first steps into understanding ourselves. I vividly remember one night, typing away late into the serenity of solitude, when a particular message popped up on my screen. It was from a fellow storyteller I had come to admire, someone who wrote with a raw honesty that resonated with me. They spoke of the first time they had seen their own shadow reflecting back at them, a friend who, at first glance, felt like an intruder in their own world. Those words struck a chord. It was as if they had pulled from my own diary. We engaged in a conversation that stretched into the early hours, exploring our connections to those rooms, and the peculiar comfort we derived from the understanding that we were never truly alone, even in our darkest moments. This exchange ignited a spark, pushing me to dig even deeper into my psyche. I began to write not only about fear but also about joy, about the afternoons spent building blanket forts, the discovered wonders of an old book collection, and crayon-scribbled maps of imaginary worlds. I painted my childhood in colors more vibrant than the dismal shadows I had clung to for so long. These explorations led to unexpected revelations, and I started to realize my last bedroom before leaving for college was surrounded by a spectrum of feelings, excitement for the future mixed with anxiety for the unknown. The presence I felt there was different, a comforting whisper reminding me that it was okay to stand on the brink of adulthood and still carry the echoes of childhood behind me. When my stories turned into a kind of catharsis, I knew I had stepped past the threshold of nostalgia and into the realm of acceptance. Writing transformed into an affirmation of who I was and who I was becoming, a journey shared with others facing their own darkness and light. As I closed my laptop one night, I felt a gentle weight lift from my chest, a knowing that those rooms, those intangible specters that had haunted my thoughts for years, were simply parts of my story, pieces of a puzzle that I had now started to reshape. Each echo was no longer a reminder of fear but a testament to my resilience and growth. I felt empowered, not just for myself, but for others who found solace in our shared experiences. It was in this space, I realized, that the shadows didn't just watch, they listened, and with every word we shared, we grew a little lighter, a little braver, and a little more human. I wouldn't trade this journey for anything, and perhaps what I had once feared was not about what watched me, but about what I could accomplish when I allowed my story to take flight, merging memory with creativity, and uncovering the beauty that lived beneath the surface. And as the world outside grew darker, I felt a comforting glow radiating from within, reminding me that perhaps, in every bedroom, past, present, and future, there lives a piece of me, a part of my journey that is always worth sharing. With each tale I wove, I found myself diving deeper into the shadows of my past, peeling back layers I had long buried under a facade of normalcy and routine. I reminisced about the tiny rooms that housed my childhood dreams, the way the yellow wallpaper in my first bedroom seemed to sigh in relief whenever I would tell stories to the pastel stuffed animals that adorned my bed. I would drape my childhood fears over those walls, and in return, they whispered back with every creak of the floorboards and soft rustle of the curtains. As I would often confide in those inanimate listeners, I gradually realized that these stories were as much for them as they were for me, a way to channel my feelings into something tangible. Yet, as an adult, I often felt cut off from that magical space where imagination thrived, especially when overwhelmed by life's relentless grind. But now, in sharing my words online, it felt as though I was invited back into that sacred place, offering not just a glimpse of my heart but an open window for others to peer through and find a reflection of their own experiences. Each post sparked a flurry of comments, confessions from strangers who echoed my childhood fears, narrating their own encounters with flickering shadows and lingering feelings that refused to be silenced. Sometimes they were lighthearted, and sometimes they struck chords that reverberated deep within, each interaction nurturing a community that felt like magic, a comfort I'd long sought. One night, as I sat under the soft light of my desk lamp, tapping away with eager fingers, I came across someone who stood out among the rest, someone named Eli. Eli shared that he lived alone in a small studio apartment, much like mine, and like me, had begun to feel haunted by the echoes of his childhood bedrooms. He spoke of how he had a relentless cycle of dreams, the same dream where he was a child again, lost in his old house, searching for something he could never grasp. His dreams always left him feeling hollow in the morning, soaked in a longing he couldn't articulate. I felt an immediate bond with him, his vulnerability resonated with my own hidden struggles. Without hesitation, I replied, fumbling for the right words to let him know he wasn't alone in this surreal experience. The conversation blossomed, with late-night exchanges that turned into shared late-night writing sessions. We grew closer, our narratives intertwining like vines climbing a forgotten wall, feeding each other's flames of creativity while pulling back the curtain of despair together. But it was one Saturday, while we were video chatting, that Eli revealed something that would change everything. With a trembling voice, he asked if I had ever felt a palpable presence in my childhood homes, something that felt as alive as the stories we shared. I paused, recalling late nights spent laying wide-eyed under the covers, where I felt I was not truly alone, a comforting presence lying just beyond the threshold between sleep and waking. A shiver cascaded through me as I said, yes, watching the flicker of recognition spark in his eyes. He confessed that his dreams often felt less like nightmares and more like invitations, urging him to return to the house he grew up in, a space laden with secrets and whispers. We shared stories of our childhood rooms, Eli's walls plastered with the praises of his ever-watchful parents, mine holding the scars of the imaginary beasts that lurked just out of sight. That night, a thought lingered in the back of my mind, and it took root. The more we talked, I had considered visiting my childhood home, hoping to illuminate the dark corners, not just to confront what lay concealed there, but to embrace the memories I had long deemed burdensome. As I floated the idea to Eli, I was surprised by how fervently he urged me to do so. "What if," he said, "there's something there waiting for you? Something that could provide answers?" After a long drive filled with uncertainty, I arrived beneath the familiar roof that once enveloped my childhood with love and dread. Darkness had settled into the night, casting a thick, oppressive air over the house. Each creak of the wooden floor was a reminder of the secrets it had held for decades. I walked into my old room, small, anachronistic, but powerful in its ability to resonate with the echoes of old laughter and sadness. I spoke aloud, recalling memories with the fervor of someone yearning for connection, thanking the walls for housing my dreams and fears. It was then that I felt a warmth, a flicker in the air, and as I closed my eyes, images flooded my thoughts, moments stitched together in a vibrant tapestry of joy, and a few dark threads of shadowed apprehension. But what struck me most was not the fear, but rather the love I felt for that sacred space, and for every version of myself that had passed through it. I closed my eyes, embracing the poignant tranquility that blanketed the room, and allowed myself to remember the promise I made long ago. I would not let fear constrict my voice. When I opened my eyes again, tears brimming with both sorrow and gratitude flowed down my cheeks. Standing there, I understood that in confronting my past, each bedroom and each story, I had reclaimed my narrative. As I returned to my apartment, fortified by this experience, I sensed the presence of something greater, a palpable connection not just to my own story, but to Eli and our blossoming community, a space where we all chose to share the dreams, fears, and beauty of our pasts. And as I sat to write that night, the glow from my desk lamp a soothing reminder of the warmth we all craved, I knew that every story shared only expanded the reach of our collective imagination. My past wouldn't confine me, it would nourish my creative spirit, urging me to dance with shadows and find the light, to remind all who listen that together we could illuminate the darkness, painting a bridge from our childhoods to the present, a bridge wrapped in the threads of storytelling, making us a little lighter, a little braver, and forever connected. I still remember the first time I walked into that small examination room, framed by pale yellow walls that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, with a flickering fluorescent bulb that hummed overhead like a persistent ghost trying to breach the silence. As a fresh-faced medical intern, I was filled with an overwhelming mix of eagerness and anxiety, flipping through pages of notes on patient rapport and ethics while trying to remember the dozens of diseases I'd only ever read about in textbooks. I wanted to make a difference, to heal and to help. But it was during that first week that life decided to hit me with a hard truth that I could never have prepared for. I was assigned to a pediatric ward, which was both a blessing and a challenge, teeming with stories that tugged at the heartstrings in ways I was still figuring out how to process. My very first patient was a young girl named Lily, with golden curls that framed her cherubic face and a smile bright enough to fill the room. Once a ray of sunshine, she had started to dim, battling a rare form of leukemia that had robbed her of her joy and her childhood. At just 8 years old, she was grappling with the reality of her treatment, the endless needles piercing her small arms, and the isolation that accompanied her illness. I was assigned to her care, and it felt like being handed a delicate glass sculpture. I wanted to protect her, to help in whatever way I could. Yet, the weight of her vulnerability crushed me in an unexpected way. Day by day, I observed how the sterile scent of antiseptics hung in the air, intertwined with cheerful decorations on the walls that seemed to mock the gravity of her situation. Our conversations flowed like a gentle stream, with her effortlessly transitioning from her favorite animated shows to the games she missed playing outdoors. I laughed along with her, tried to adopt her innocence and optimism, but inside, I felt an ache that gnawed at my insides. My time with her was fleeting in the grand scheme of her treatment, external to the ebb and flow of what I was learning. I had never encountered this kind of emotional terrain before. How could I balance my professional responsibilities while also forming a bond that felt so achingly human? I went home each evening wondering if I should be feeling more detached or allowing myself to care deeply for this tiny soul who was learning at such a tender age that life could sometimes be cruel. Then came the day when the doctor pulled me aside, his brow furrowed under the weight of difficult words. The treatment wasn't working, Lily had developed resistance to the chemotherapy drugs they had been using. He spoke in hushed tones, outlining potential alternatives, but each option felt like more of a gamble than a safety net. I left the huddle feeling hollow, knowing I had to face her with this unwelcome truth. That evening, as I prepared myself to sit by her side, I felt a tsunami of panic wash over me. How do you explain that the medicine meant to heal her was now failing? How can one express that kind of heartbreak without shattering the fragile spirit of a child? Sitting down next to her bed, I tried to keep my tone light, but she could see through my facade. "You look sad," she said, her innocent blue eyes searching mine for answers. I opened my mouth to reassure her, but nothing came out. Her tiny hand reached out and clasped mine, an innocent gesture that ignited something powerful within me. I finally spoke, telling her that we were in this together, that she was brave and strong, but inside, my heart felt like it was breaking. I thought about the guidelines and the ethics, the tightrope that healthcare professionals are expected to walk between their emotions and responsibilities, how HIPAA measures guard our patients' privacy but often leave us feeling emotionally isolated from one another. The words echoed in my head, they prescribe distance, but how could I maintain that with a girl who truly was just a child? In the following days, as we both faced the harsh realities ahead, she began to ask me about my life, who I was, where I came from, things I never thought I would share with a patient. I found myself divulging snippets of my own story, whether about my childhood dreams or my recent hobbies, and she would eagerly respond with tales of her favorite books. In those moments, laughter would bubble between us, momentarily dispelling the heavy veil of grief that lingered over her room. Each visit became a bittersweet fusion of joy and despair, an exchange of life even on days that felt suffocatingly bleak. Yet, the inevitable happened 4 weeks later. Lily's condition suddenly worsened, and I knew deep down that we were nearing an end. I sat beside her in silence, holding her small hand, realizing that the barrier between patient and caregiver had irrevocably torn. It was during those last moments, when she looked up at me with those trusting eyes, that everything stopped. We shared a laugh, a flicker of joy amidst the heavy heartache, and she whispered, "I'll always be your friend." Just moments later, her breaths grew shallow, the beep of machines fading into a haunting lullaby. I could only grasp her hand tighter, the tears now streaming down my face as she exhaled for the last time, her little body finally releasing the burden it had carried. It broke me. I lost a piece of myself that day. I left the hospital that evening feeling heavier than I had ever felt before. I hadn't held myself together, nor did I understand how one could maintain professionalism when one's heart was so deeply entwined in the difficult fabric of a life lost too soon. And as I sat in the back seat of the cab, staring blankly at the passing street lights, the weight of the world pressed down on me, an acute reminder of what it meant to be fragile. I realized that no amount of HIPAA training or medical knowledge could prepare me for the emotional tapestry woven between healing and loss, the deep, sometimes cruel bond we form with those we are meant to care for in this life. Now, months later, I reflect on that time with Lily with a bittersweet sense of acceptance. The journey of healing doesn't always mean mending. Sometimes, it's about learning to carry the pieces of what was lost with compassion and grace. I still work in healthcare, still hold the hands of children, and every day, I remind myself of that laughter, the light she brought into even the darkest of rooms, and I know that for every heart I may break, I also have the opportunity to build bridges of connection, however fleeting they may be. Because at the end of the day, it is the love we share, even in sadness, that truly helps us heal. As I sit here, reflecting on those poignant memories, I'm reminded of a patient who brought me an unexpected lesson in love and loss. It began quietly, like a whisper of fate, when I received the case of a young boy named Ethan, a bright-eyed 7-year-old with a spirit that shone even in the confines of the hospital. The first time I entered his room, his laughter rang out like sweet music, flowing against the stark white walls adorned with cheerful drawings that filled the space with a remarkable warmth. The joy he radiated was infectious, serving as a stark contrast to the sterile environment that usually wrapped us all in its cold embrace. I was a few years into my career, passionate yet inexperienced, still wrestling with the emotional toll of caring for those in need while protecting my heart from the inevitable heartaches that healthcare often brings. Ethan had been diagnosed with leukemia, a battle he faced with the bravery of a lion, cracking jokes about his hair loss and insisting that the doctors were merely making him a little superhero ready to save the world. His resilience and ability to find light in darkness reminded me of that precious child I lost, and each bittersweet laugh of Ethan struck a chord in me. It was a delicate dance, almost like walking the tightrope of hope and fear, both wondering if I could risk getting attached while knowing he was in a precarious place. With each passing day, I would sit by his bedside, sharing stories, jokes, and even the occasional tears. It felt like a privilege to be a part of his journey, to witness a child's will to fight, to dream, even when pain threatened to pull him under. Yet, there came a day when I walked into his room, expecting the usual banter. Instead, I was met with an unsettling silence, the kind that wraps around you like fog, heavy and suffocating. On that day, Ethan's eyes were closed, a thin sheet pulled tightly over his frail body, his mom sitting beside him, cradling his tiny hand in hers. I felt that familiar pang in my chest, the fear of the inevitable, but I steadied myself, reminding myself to stay present, to honor every moment. I whispered sweet greetings, sharing tales of the outside world, of bright sunny days just waiting for him to conquer. But it was Ethan's reply that shattered me. As he opened his eyes, that spark, a fire I thought would never dim, flickered weakly. He looked toward me, and with a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Can we still go on our adventures in my dreams? I want you to come with me." It felt like a knife twisting in my gut, ruthlessly. How could I tell a boy who had fought so valiantly that sometimes dreams are where we go to escape our realities? Instead, I smiled, and with a gentle nod, I promised him we would embark on our greatest quest yet. That night, as I lay in my own bed, wrestling with sleepless thoughts, I found myself drifting into a world of dreams. In my mind's eye, I could see Ethan and me, soaring above mountains, diving into oceans filled with sparkling fish, laughing as we sprinted through fields of swaying flowers. It was beautiful and vivid, a tapestry woven from all the joy he had shared. The following days felt like a montage, memories played in fast forward, until it was time for Ethan to say goodbye. To see his heartache mirrored in the faces of his family was solace and sorrow entwined, a bittersweet symphony I was all too familiar with. I held his hand as he took his last breaths, wishing I could take away every ounce of pain with my bare hands, pleading silently for a miracle. And when he finally drifted, his peaceful face etched in my memory, I realized this was a part of my journey, a part that I had to carry with compassion and grace. The hardest moments in our lives often shape our paths into something beautiful, something meaningful, no matter how tragic. Looking back on that chapter, I understand now that pain exists alongside joy, and healing does not equate to forgetting. I learned to wear my scars as badges that remind me of the love shared, even in fleeting moments, and how those moments can bridge what feels like an insurmountable divide. Nowadays, I pour all that I've learned into every child I encounter, sharing laughter, kindness, and a gentle presence to remind them that it's okay to be vulnerable, to embrace emotions, even the hardest ones. Because, in the end, it's not about the hearts we break, it's about the love we've given and the connections we've had, even when they remind us of what we've lost. My journey continues, and while the weight of grief never truly disappears, it has shaped me, making me more compassionate and empathetic. Life, an unpredictable and beautiful mess, brings us together, even as it tears us apart. And with every child's laughter I hear, I remember that the journey of healing is about cherishing those memories, carrying the pieces forward, and giving love as fiercely as we feel loss. Every day, I hold on to the hope that in the end, it is this love that helps us heal. Update: a few weeks after Ethan's passing, as I sat in the break room with my colleagues, a familiar face walked in. It was Ethan's mother, a visit I had not anticipated. She sparked a conversation that felt like a warm embrace, recounting stories of Ethan's joy, his love for life, and how he often spoke of our adventures and dreams. She reached out, holding my hand, tears glistening in her eyes, and said, "Thank you for seeing him, for sharing his laughter and reminding us all of the beauty in even the hardest days." In that moment, I understood, we were continuing the journey together, carrying pieces of love that transcended loss, forming a bond that would forever connect us. As we sat together in that small, dimly lit room, I could feel the weight of her gratitude pressing down on me, heavy yet sweet, like the promise of rain after a long drought. Ethan's mother, with her fragile smile, drew me back into the memories of all the times we shared with her son, his insatiable giggles echoing in the sterile air of the clinic, his mischievous antics that wove laughter into the fabric of our often somber surroundings. Each story she shared wrapped around me like a soft blanket, warming me against the chill of grief that I sometimes felt creeping at the edges of my heart. I realized then that healing isn't something we do alone, it's a community effort built on shared love and poignant moments. We spoke for hours, the outside world fading into the background as we became a safe haven for each other. She recounted the day Ethan saw the ocean for the first time, how wide his eyes grew, and how he squealed with delight as the waves danced around his tiny feet. With each story, I could see the flicker of life return to her eyes, a reminder that even in our most profound sorrow, the essence of our loved ones remains forever illuminated in the joy they imparted. In that shared vulnerability, we formed an unspoken pact, a promise to honor Ethan not just in our memory but by living fully, by embracing the joy and laughter that he once brought into our lives. As our hands remained clasped, I could feel the pulse of our connection, a lifeline forged through loss and laughter, through heartbreak and hope. As the shadows lengthened in the room and the soft glow of evening crept through the window, I sensed that this was more than just a visit, it was a turning point. We could grow together in our grief, transforming it into something beautiful and nurturing rather than allowing it to cut us off from joy. I began to contemplate ways I could honor Ethan's legacy, perhaps by organizing a small gathering for families within the hospital, creating an evening of joy where laughter could fill the air the way he once had, a butterfly flitting from one bloom to another, leaving behind traces of wonder. Leaving that day, I felt lighter, as if I had shed a layer of sorrow and found room for new beginnings. I held on to our radiant conversation, replaying her words in my mind. Even in sadness, we could stir the depths of joy. Love was not merely a memory, it was a force vibrant and alive. Days turned into weeks, and with each new sunrise, I found renewed inspiration. Within myself and my work, I pored over every detail of the event I was planning, wanting it to reflect Ethan's essence, a blend of creativity, imagination, and the exuberant spirit he had embodied. Finally, the night arrived, and the community gathered under a canopy of twinkling fairy lights, laughter melding with the soft sounds of night. I stood at the front, heart racing as familiar faces mingled, their smiles interspersed with bittersweet reminders of what we had lost. We filled the space with colors, balloons, painted rocks, and banners that announced the joy of living and loving deeply, something that Ethan had taught us with every smile he shared. I watched as families interacted, each tender moment a testament to connections being forged anew, and it felt as if Ethan was right there with us, his laughter curling around us like a tender embrace. That evening was transformative. It not only stood as a monument to Ethan's joy but also as an invocation of our own healing paths. As I looked around at the smiling faces, I realized how far we had all come, united through both our grief and joy. I could hear echoes of laughter that were reminiscent of the sweet sounds he once made, and it filled my heart to know we were all learning to carry those pieces together, to find joy even amidst shadows. Reflecting back, I understood that every life touched holds the potential to spark connections that ripple far beyond our immediate perceptions of loss. The memory of Ethan no longer felt like a fragile remnant of pain. Instead, it had metamorphosed into a vibrant reminder of the resistance of joy. The journey of healing doesn't always mean mending, but it most certainly means learning to carry the pieces of what was lost with compassion and grace, and for that, I will forever be grateful. Update: a few months later, I received a message from Ethan's mother. She told me that her family started a tradition of celebrating Ethan's favorite things every year, flying kites in the park on his birthday, with laughter resonating through the breeze, reminding them to cherish every fleeting moment of joy life offers. She invited me to join, and I could hardly hold back the tears that welled in my eyes. I realized then that love is never truly lost, it finds new ways to wrap around us, creating connections that bring light even in the darkest of places. I almost quit my job today, and it had nothing to do with the relentless paperwork or the beleaguered patients lined up outside the clinic. I'm a nurse practitioner, and my days usually blur together in an endless cycle of exams and prescriptions, but this day felt different, like the calm before a storm. I was looking forward to my afternoon shift, a solid block of time free from the morning rush, just me, the soothing hum of the fluorescent lights, and the comforting scent of antiseptic lingering in the air. That's when Lily walked in. She was around my age, maybe a bit younger, and her vibrant green hair was styled in a chaotic bun that seemed to echo her energy. I'd heard whispers of her around the clinic, the one with the unusual case. For someone who dealt with anxiety and depression, she managed to light up the dreary waiting room with her infectious grin, but it quickly faded when I called her name. There was something haunting lurking in the depths of her eyes, a slight tremor in her hands that didn't match her bright facade. As she settled into the examination room, the atmosphere shifted. I asked the usual questions: how she'd been feeling, any changes in medication, and why she sought help today. Instead of the typical responses, though, she began to tell me about the voices. They were quiet at first, just murmurs that danced at the edge of her hearing. But lately? They'd grown louder, insisting she was being watched by someone rather sinister. My heart sank into my stomach. HIPAA exists for a reason, protecting both patient privacy and our sanity, but as she continued, something tugged on my conscience. She said her family didn't believe her and, much worse, that they had given up on trying to help her. "It's as if they'd rather pretend I don't exist at all," she said, her voice trembling. I couldn't fathom the depth of that pain, the isolation. I could see the flicker of desperation in her eyes, the yearning for validation. I tried to reassure her, encouraging her to seek support from professionals who could offer therapy and possibly medication adjustments, but she insisted that wasn't enough. The voices had sharpened their focus, demanding she prove her existence in a way that threatened her well-being. I felt my heart race as her story unfolded, a pit forming deep within me. It was getting harder to maintain my professionalism. I knew I shouldn't share my thoughts, my personal experiences as a fellow human who'd felt unseen at times, but a voice in my mind urged me to try. "Sometimes, the pressure of feeling invisible can become unbearable," I admitted, keeping my tone steady. "But it's crucial to reach out to those who care for you." She hesitated, her expression riddled with conflicted emotions. "But what if I don't matter to anyone?" she whispered. For a moment, I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Many people felt that way at some point, including myself. I wanted to reach across the space between us, to take her hand and reassure her that she mattered. But I couldn't, not without breaching that invisible line that kept patients and healthcare providers apart. I took a deep breath, the weight of the conversation settling heavily on my shoulders. As she left the room, I felt a mix of relief and dread. I was haunted by her words, her pain, and the burdens I couldn't ease for her. It felt wrong not to do more, to walk away and let someone so desperate wander alone into the world, especially with her fragile mental state. That night, I couldn't shake the experience, replaying her words over and over. I couldn't help but reflect on the strength of connection that often eludes us in our professional roles. I wondered if I had neglected that part of my oath, to care as a human as well as a practitioner. Maybe it was my own past experiences intertwined with her pain, but when I clocked in the next day, I resolved to change my approach. I wanted to find ways to connect my patients with support systems that made them feel valid, to foster a space where they could share openly. Perhaps I couldn't reach out in the fullest sense, but I could certainly lead them to resources that would prove that they mattered. As I worked on crafting a new referral brochure for mental wellness services within the clinic that day, I felt a sense of purpose pulsating within me. And in a way, through focusing on Lily's needs, I began healing some fragments of my own past. If nothing else, I hoped she would find a voice she could trust, a lifeline to bridge the gaps left by those who'd turned away. Months passed, and every so often, I would see Lily's name on the schedule. Each encounter felt like a new chapter. On one visit, I was pleased to see she looked better. The shadows under her eyes had lifted slightly, replaced by a flicker of hope in her voice. "You were right," she said, smiling as she unfolded the complexities of her therapy sessions and newfound support group. "I found my voice. And it turns out, I do matter." In that moment, a warmth spread through my chest, a confirmation that sometimes the smallest acts of reaching out can ignite a change profound enough to alter lives. Lily didn't have to bear her burdens alone anymore, and neither did I. I realized then that being a caregiver wasn't just about the prescriptions or the examinations. Sometimes, it was about sharing pieces of ourselves to help others stitch together their narratives, reminding them that they are not invisible nor expendable. In sharing our stories, we learn to redefine connections and uplift each other beyond the stigmas that might bind us. As I took in these thoughts, I glanced over at Lily, her apprehensive expression softening as she leaned back in the chair, visibly more at ease. The sterile white walls of my office, which usually echoed with the coldness of clinical detachment, seemed to blossom with warmth. There was something powerful unfolding between us, a shared vulnerability that felt like the roots of a plant intertwining beneath the surface, hidden yet vital. Somehow, this realization shifted something within me as well. I was no longer just a healthcare provider, I was both a listener and a participant in an unfolding human experience. However, the day grew darker as I remembered the nagging fears that had haunted me since I became a therapist. My mind wandered back to the unwritten rules of my profession. The protocols of HIPAA, with their stringent regulations, often loomed in the background like a shadow, reminding me that I must tread carefully lest I lose not only my career but also the trust of my patients. What if I stepped over a line with Lily? What if sharing even the slightest piece of my life led to a breach of confidentiality? I was supposed to be the one providing support, not dragging us both into murky waters where boundaries blurred. The anxiety gnawed at me, threading a mixture of elation and trepidation through my chest. To prevent the encroaching worries from spiraling, I redirected the conversation, asking her about her own experiences. A flicker of hesitation crossed her face before she divulged her first encounters with therapy. As she recounted her journey through various milestones, each wrought with its own struggles and victories, a sense of connection deepened. There was an innate comfort in the way our conversation flowed, a gentle give and take that felt as gratifying as it was cathartic. Every shared word knitted our beings closer together, yet in my quieter moments, the toll of my own thoughts lingered like a muted refrain in the background. As the session drew to a close, we exchanged pleasantries, but I sensed an unspoken bond tethered between us, stronger than the unyielding protocols of my profession. Lily had opened up in ways I never anticipated, allowing me to glimpse glorious vulnerabilities within her that reminded me of my own struggles, overwhelming at times, but profoundly human. I made a silent vow to find a way to navigate this connection without falling prey to my own fears. Perhaps, I thought, I could share selectively, using my own experiences to guide but remaining steadfast on the path of professionalism. In the following days, I immersed myself in my work, the rhythm of routine comforting yet occasionally disquieting. Yet, I couldn't shake the memory of that session with Lily. I found myself replaying our conversation over and over, marveling at how two souls braving their respective storms could find solace in shared vulnerabilities. With each passing moment, my initial fears surrounding that session diminished. I felt a resolve taking root. I wanted to work on my boundaries while still holding space for the humanity both Lily and I had uncovered. Finally, I decided that the best way to navigate this delicate situation was not in isolation but together. During our next session, I broached the topic with Lily, underlining the importance of our boundaries yet sharing that vulnerability had proven transformative for both of us. To my relief, she assured me she felt the same sense of community, the relief of companionship. Together, we forged a pact, to be honest about our boundaries while allowing our connections to flourish. The resolution felt simplistic yet significant. It was an unspoken agreement to uphold the integrity of our therapeutic space while celebrating the truth of our shared humanity. With each session that followed, I felt lighter, an odd sense of liberation tethered to my heart. Lily continued to open up in ways that astonished me, and I found myself drawn to her courage, the way she navigated her challenges with such simmering hope. The fear of HIPAA violations dulled in the face of the profound benefits of our connection. It became part of the backdrop of my practice, where I learned to delicately balance my role while still being present, authentic, and, most importantly, human. Reflecting now on that initial trepidation, I feel a newfound appreciation for the journey we've embarked upon, the uncharted waters of vulnerability and the cozy warmth that rises when care meets courage. Amidst the ethical intricacies of my profession, I've found that the essence of caregiving flourishes in honesty, resilience, and shared stories, cementing a beautiful, imperishable bond stretched across what once felt like walls of clinic and distance. After some time, I received a message from Lily. It was brief yet packed with gratitude, a simple, "thank you," expressing how our sessions felt less like a bandage on wounds but rather a seasoned balm for her spirit. I smiled as I read it, my heart lifting again at the thought that we both had navigated this path together, reminding me that sometimes, in the delicate dance of healing, the lines can blur in the most beautiful ways. Life was about bridging gaps, and our bond, though formed in a therapeutic context, had transformed into a cherished connection that I never could have forged alone. And so I realized, in the unpredictable landscape of being a caregiver, it is the humanity we share, the light and shadows, that helps us grow. As I reflected on that turning point between us, I found myself sitting in my small office, a cozy nook piled high with medical textbooks and framed reminders of why I chose this path in the first place. The walls, painted a calming shade of blue, felt more comforting than sterile as they witnessed the evolution of our relationship, a relationship I had once thought was strictly professional now unfolding into something rich and redemptive. I recalled the countless hours I spent with Lily, sifting through her complexities and the layers of stories she carried like old baggage. Each session had been a dance of vulnerability, her heart laid bare against the backdrop of my clinical paperwork and diagnostic goals. I had come to realize that through her own depths of despair, a flicker of resilience shone, and in turn, she was illuminating the way for me, a reminder of the intrinsic connection that binds us all as we navigate our personal labyrinths. But with joy comes uncertainty, and as thrilled as I was to forge this bond, I knew I had to tread carefully. There were boundaries to consider, ethics to uphold, particularly with someone whose path had been riddled with trauma and heartache. I pondered the intricacies of our conversations and wondered how I could continue to support her while avoiding the slippery slope of overreach. Amidst my thoughts, the reality was the challenging nature of navigating a caregiver's role, enhancing lives and offering insights without overstepping that invisible line, one that could easily blur. Soon, our next session arrived, a Wednesday that marked a full month since she had first come to see me. I prepared with mixed emotions, excitement stitched with the shadows of apprehension. As I entered the room, a familiar sight warmed my heart. Lily was already seated, her hands twirling a small silver locket, a talisman of sorts that had clearly become her anchor. "I've been thinking about what you said last time," she began, her voice steady, yet with a softness that carried an underlying vulnerability. "About sharing pieces of ourselves." Her words unfurled like blossoms in spring. Our conversation deepened and broadened in ways that felt profound yet so natural. She spoke of benevolent ghosts from her past, former friends who had fallen away, consumed by their own battles, and how their absence left scars she sometimes could not articulate. I listened intently, leaning forward, as time seemed to slip away like sand through fingers. What followed was a gentle volley of stories, her laughter sparking light moments, while the shadows of sorrow lurked just behind the edges, grounding her narrative. A part of me knew that I had to reveal a bit of my own past, a thread of vulnerability to encourage her narrative to grow. I shared tales of my early days in this field, moments of crippling self-doubt when my idealism collided with the stark realities of human pain. I spoke of patients whose stories had etched themselves into the tapestry of my soul, shaping my resolve and orientation. A fierce yet fragile connection blossomed in that exchange, making our struggles feel lighter, almost woven into each other's fabric of experience in a way that transcended clinical boundaries. As weeks drifted on, I felt us move through those uncharted waters, each session filled with dimensions that I had long ago yearned for in this profession, a partnership of healing in its purest form. I was filled with hope, camaraderie, and yet, a tinge of fear. It was the fear of losing her to the world's cruel indifference or the possibility of outing her vulnerabilities to another who would not understand. The emotional weight was palpable, but we thrived in our candid spaces, lifting each other. Sometimes I found it a bit too exhilarating and overwhelming, yet necessary. Then one day, it happened. Lily mentioned her desire to take a step further, exploring creative outlets to channel her feelings. She spoke of wanting to write a blog, to immortalize her battles and stir others who might feel lost. My heart raced, not out of fear, but sheer exhilaration at the thought of her blossoming beyond the confines of our sessions. Yet, the notion struck a dual chord. What if revealing those thoughts to the world puts you at risk? I hesitated. But she countered with a quiet steeliness that took me aback. "It's my story, and I deserve to tell it how I want." And she paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. It was a moment that whispered volumes, and I felt our roles reverse in that heartbeat. I began to see her not just as a patient in need of care, but as a beacon of strength, reaffirming that healing was a shared journey, bringing us back, full circle, to where we started, the necessity of weaving our lives together into something magnificent. With that revelation, I let go of my fears, recognizing that sometimes a pathway to healing lay in the raw honesty of our experiences. I embarked on encouraging her, offering my support and guidance while she traversed this new creative venture. As she crafted her first post, I felt a rush of gratitude. By helping her navigate the uncharted waters of sharing, I was also embracing my fears and reaffirming my purpose. In that light, I learned and grew right alongside her. And suddenly, the once stern lines of caregiver and patient blurred in the most beautiful, validating way. As days turned to weeks, I watched her transform into a confident storyteller, her words wrapping around other seekers of solace as if crafting a communal blanket in which they could huddle. The small canvas of our original therapeutic room became a vibrant tapestry stitched with lifelike colors reflecting joy and sorrow, laughter and tears. It drew others in, creating bonds of understanding and shared struggles. One day, while uploading her latest blog post, she reached out to me with dazzling excitement. A 2-minute read turned into an avalanche of uplifting responses. It was then that I began to fully grasp the magnitude of our connection. I felt closer to Lily than I had to anyone in a long time, and as the lines of our roles shifted, I found comfort in the dance we had created together. Then, as the seasons changed, so did our meetings. We held space together, celebrated milestones, and cried over setbacks, all part of a story that was still unfolding. Each session became a symphony of shared moments, navigating the unpredictable landscape together, replete with laughter, tears, and the beauty of newfound openness. With each step, I grew more certain in my belief that this journey was reciprocal. We were learners, healers, companions, and in the end, we were simply two souls forging ahead, one day at a time. As I look back on that journey, I remember it as a paradox, a blend of vulnerability wrapped in strength. I thought I would make Lily stronger, but in turn, she helped me reclaim parts of myself that I had buried under the weight of duty and expectation. In embracing her fragility while celebrating her resolve, I became entwined in the very essence of caregiving, a shared spirit where the act of healing became about all of us, far beyond the mere confines of an office. I never once regretted that I hadn't quit. Instead, I found a path not only for her but for myself, and this, I realized, was precisely what I was meant to do. Update: it's been 6 months since I last wrote this account, and I felt compelled to share a final chapter. Lily's blog had taken off. She was invited onto a platform to speak about her experiences, and through it all, her voice, our voice, has become a beacon for others struggling in shadows. Last week, we hosted a community gathering, bringing people together to share their stories face to face in a celebration of resilience. Something magical happened. In seeing the way our paths converged with others, I realized I wasn't just a caregiver, I was a part of something much larger than myself. We weren't alone anymore, and in stepping away from the boundaries I once feared, I learned that being human means opening ourselves up to the tapestry of lives we weave together, brightened by the stories we share. I never thought my family's would unravel like a cheap piece of yarn, but here we are, sitting at our cramped kitchen table under the flickering light bulb that's a bit too yellow, discussing the accusations that have turned my whole world upside down. My brothers and I grew up idolizing our 2 uncles, who were the quintessential cool relatives, full of jokes, stories about their time in the military, and life lessons that felt like gold on summer afternoons. Our family gatherings often felt like a circus: laughter, potluck dishes that were barely edible, and the feeling that we were connected by something unbreakable, woven tight through years of shared experiences. But as my parents aged, the family dynamics began to shift in unsettling ways. The whispers started when my parents, both long retired and now comfortably settled in a quiet life, began discussing their estate plan. It had never been something I paid much attention to until my dad casually mentioned to me one evening while we were cleaning up after dinner that he and my mom had decided not to leave any significant inheritance to our uncles, which was a shock to hear. "We worked hard for what we have," he said, and I could tell he was a little offended that his brothers would presume otherwise. It made sense, right? After all, our family's financial struggles back in the day were no secret, and to think they might expect something now felt like a betrayal. But who was I to carry this burden? Then came the day it all changed. The kitchen remained silent, the kind of silent that presses heavily against your chest, until my older brother, Jason, unexpectedly burst in with the kind of energy reserved for someone who has just discovered the cure for a long-standing disease. He proclaimed he had heard from one of his friends about my Uncle Mark planning a family reunion and was hellbent on incorporating discussions about inheritance into the festivities. It felt crass to me, the idea of talking about money amongst all the laughter and nostalgic reminiscing, but it was as if I were in a play where I could either choose to speak my lines or just freeze on stage, utterly paralyzed by the impending drama. In my heart, I knew I should tell them, but the thought of being the one to drop that bomb was unbearable. Days passed, each one heavier than the last, while I kept my secret, debating whether to alert my uncles or to let them assume that something profound would come their way. The thought of my father's words rang in my mind: "Don't let them think they can take what's ours," and part of me held onto that sentiment with a grip stronger than iron. I started to feel guilty, especially when I noticed how quiet the uncles were whenever they visited. The usual banter gave way to awkward pauses as they sidled up to the kitchen counter, waiting for a slice of my mom's famous apple pie and, perhaps, a hint of what was to come. One afternoon, I couldn't take it any longer. I texted my uncles to meet with me for coffee, hoping against hope that I could muster the courage to be straightforward, to be the one to break the news gently, perhaps even offering them some semblance of understanding. They showed up on a Tuesday morning, both eager and slightly skeptical. The cafe was quaint, light flooded through the large windows, and as soon as we sat down, I found myself staring at the cup of steaming coffee in front of me, their expectant eyes glancing between me and the pastry display. My mouth felt dry when I finally spoke, the words catching like thorns in my throat, unsure how to wrap them in kindness. I told them about my parents' decision, watched their faces shift from curiosity to disbelief, and then dismay. Mark, in particular, looked wounded, like I'd trampled on something sacred. "We've always been family," he said, his voice a mix of hurt and disappointment. How could they do this to us? I felt every inch of that guilt stab deep. The conversation spiraled, and by the time we parted, my heart was heavy with regret and concern. Days turned into weeks as the awkwardness settled like dust in the corners of our once bustling family gatherings. Neither my uncles nor I could bridge the emotional chasm that had suddenly appeared. Each time they visited, they'd hug me but linger a second longer as if waiting for an apology or some clarification that I just couldn't offer. My brothers and I spoke often about the rift, our conversations tinged with uncertainty about whether we'd created an irreparable divide between our family factions. Soon, my parents caught wind of the tension, and I knew they felt the strain, their content lives now shadowed by the repercussions of their decision. Finally, after a particularly strained holiday dinner, I sat down with my parents and laid everything out, the tension, the questions from my uncles, and how much it pained me to face them each time without a resolution. To my surprise, they listened quietly, expressions unreadable. After a long pause, my father finally sighed, "Maybe we should talk to them, clear the air." And it struck me then how refreshing honesty could be, how liberating it felt just to strip away the weight I'd shouldered alone. A few weeks later, my parents called my uncles over for dinner, and we all sat together, the kitchen table once again laden not just with food but with a sense of collective apprehension and hope. When the discussion turned to the will and my uncles had been given the full context of my parents' perspective, things changed. I watched as they spoke, voices rising and falling with emotion, laughter and sorrow spilling forth in equal measure. It became clear that bonds could stretch and twist but wouldn't easily break if we chose to approach each other with empathy rather than fists clenched in anger. With each shared story about their upbringing, about what our family's legacy meant to them, I felt the air lighten, the invisible walls we'd built around ourselves, slowly crumbling with every word spoken. In the end, I learned that while silence may sometimes feel easier, especially when wielded as a shield against discomfort, it can also isolate you just as much as any conflict. I realized that navigating family relationships, especially in the wake of hidden truths, demanded courage, a courage that often welcomes growth rather than resentment. As we settled into genuine conversation, I felt hope sprout anew. My family wouldn't just survive this, we'd find a way to thrive, learning to hold conversations that resonated with love and honesty. Even the hiccups along the way served a purpose, reminding us how valuable our connections truly were, especially when seasons of rediscovery were closer than we dared to believe. Update: a few months later, things have transformed completely. Our family reunions now feel almost like rebirths, where laughter mingles with open conversations, and we hold space for one another. My uncles even started a family project with my dad, turning an old shed into a community tool library for our neighborhood. It's beautiful, surrounded by greenery, echoes of chatter, and the sense of purpose we've created together. Who knew the truth could intertwine rather than tear us apart? Life isn't perfect, but every single gathering now feels so full of light, and I'm filled with gratitude for the journey. It's hard to sum up the feelings that swirl within me when I think about how things have changed. I remember the first family gathering after the truth spilled out into the open like the last drops of a long overdue rain. There we were, gathered in Grandma's backyard, a place that had been both sanctuary and battleground in my memories. The air felt electrified with a mix of apprehension and hope. It was the first time since our family dinner when everyone knew the narrative had shifted. I could see my uncles, eyes darting between the familiar, old family photo frames, shadowed memories, and the unfamiliar, a canvas of new experiences we were now creating together. When my dad proposed the idea of turning the old shed into a community tool library, it was met with a bit of silence, the kind that feels like the pause before a storm. I held my breath, half expecting one of my uncles to toss in an argument about money or inheritance, to feel the tension crackle again. But instead, I watched as it began to sink in for everyone. One uncle, the quietest among us, finally spoke up, his voice soft and a little shaky. "We could use this space for something good," he said, a light flickering in his eyes. I felt the tension fade in that moment. It was as if the universe shifted just a little, nudging us toward something better. As the days turned into weeks, our gatherings evolved into something closer to revivals, moments infused with laughter that felt both healing and authentic. We would sit around the fire pit, sharing stories that once would have gone uncrossed, tales of our childhood, lessons learned, heartbreaks endured. I noticed my uncles opening up about their own lives, vulnerabilities exposed like the petals of a blossoming flower. There was a remarkable softness when they spoke to me, their voices imbued with sincerity and a desire to connect that had seemed so distant before. There was a bond forming, tangible as the wood we were turning into shelves for the library. It was a beautiful thing to witness. It felt like watching a tapestry being woven, thread by thread, stitch by stitch, all colored by truth and understanding. When we finally gathered for the grand opening of the tool library, I stood back and took it all in. The shed had transformed, painted a deep green that blended perfectly with the surrounding trees, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh wood and laughter. Neighbors trickled in, and my heart swelled as I watched my uncles explain how to borrow tools to curious families. My dad stood next to them, beaming with pride. For once, they were not just my uncles, they had become community leaders, actively fostering connection and collaboration. Watching the joy flicker across their faces felt like a natural high, one that enveloped us all. There, in the warmth of that late afternoon sun, I realized that while we had stumbled through our own storms, we were now creating a lighthouse, something that illuminated our path forward. Reflecting on this journey, I felt a gentle sense of closure, the kind that doesn't erase the past but rather integrates it into something stronger, wiser. While the landscape of our family dynamic had changed forever, it felt as if we had welcomed a new chapter instead of mourning the old one. The future seemed less daunting, more inviting, like stepping into a vast, sunlit field rather than wading through murky water. I often think about how our initial fear of inheritance and material legacies morphed into an appreciation of shared experiences and memories created together. We realized that the true inheritance wasn't hidden behind walls of a grand home, but rather in the laughter and trust forged among us. As I look ahead, I no longer see them just as my uncles who might have held me at arm's length. They're my partners in this journey of growth, reminding me with every shared meal and exchanged story that family isn't merely defined by blood or bonds but by the willingness to come together in authenticity. And that truth, I've learned, is something worth cherishing far beyond any inheritance. Life is a creating and recreating cycle, and somehow, through it all, my heart remains full of gratitude, not just for how things have transformed, but for the love that has managed to intertwine our lives once more. As I sit here reflecting on the changes in our family, I can't help but smile at the way the world feels lighter now. It's almost surreal, the way an unspoken tension has been lifted, replaced by a warmth that envelops our gatherings like a cozy blanket. The first reunion after my revelation was a tentative affair, with nervous glances exchanged and silences hanging heavy in the air. Yet, as the sun sank low, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, something shifted. My father started sharing stories of our grandfather, tales that spilled his laughter and life wisdom, and slowly, one by one, my uncles loosened up, joining in with their own memories, their voices blending like a harmonious song. These weren't just reflections of the past, they were seeds for our new beginning. Each laugh echoed with a hint of relief, and with every shared story, the walls we'd built around our hearts began to crumble. It was in those moments that we discovered we were still connected, despite the pain that had lingered for too long. As the months passed, we set to work on the community tool library, a project that not only renovated a physical space but also our emotional landscapes. I forged new bonds with my uncles, who revealed surprising depths to their personalities. One uncle had a knack for woodworking, while another had a passion for gardening. Together, they taught me how to repair rusted tools, turning mundane objects into treasures, much like the transformation we were undergoing as a family. On weekends, we'd gather at the old shed, which became a canvas for our creativity. Laughter filled the air as we sanded down surfaces, painted walls, and planted flowers around the entrance, breathing life into the once neglected structure. In those sunlit hours, I found healing amidst the sawdust and smiles. But the biggest surprise came when my uncles confessed their regrets about the distance that had grown between us all those years. They shared their fears of being perceived as distant or unsupportive, their intentions muddled by misunderstandings and silence. It was a sobering moment, simply listening to them. The air felt charged with vulnerability, like a precious gift exchanged between us. I shared my own struggles, my feelings of intimidation that had kept me at a distance, and slowly we realized how intertwined our experiences were. Each of us had been holding back, afraid that showing our true selves would push us further apart. It was difficult, peeling back those layers, but there was a profound sense of liberation in our honesty. The culmination of this journey came during our fall gathering, a time when the air would grow crisper and the leaves would transform into brilliant shades of red and gold. We decided to have a potluck, each family member contributing a dish that represented their favorite family recipe. As we gathered around the long table laden with food, I felt a rush of warmth wash over me, the beauty of simple moments shared with cherished people. We passed plates laden with food, each offering accompanied by stories that brought those dishes to life. My aunt's rich lasagna made with love, my uncle's spicy chili shared on cold winter nights, and my father's homemade apple pie that reminded us all of our summer harvests. With every bite, I realized nourishment wasn't just physical, it was emotional, forged in the trials we had weathered together. The laughter returned, but this time it was accompanied by a shared understanding of our vulnerabilities. The battles fought in silence had made the joy that much sweeter. And as the sun set, casting a warm glow through the trees, it felt like a real celebration, not just of the food but of us, our journey towards authenticity. As the echoes of laughter danced around us, I could feel the weight of the past slipping away, replaced by a newfound appreciation of family that went beyond mere obligation. My heart soared with gratitude for the wisdom of honesty, for the connections we managed to rebuild through embracing our truths. In this moment, I understood that not every story unfolds perfectly. The beauty lies in the chance to start anew, to cherish what we've built together, and to continue shaping a family that thrives on openness and love, a legacy worth far more than any inheritance could ever offer. I never imagined I would be caught in a struggle between my boyfriend and my father, but sometimes life throws you into the most unexpected conflicts. Growing up, my dad was my rock, the kind of guy who taught me how to ride a bike on a rickety old road, always standing close enough that I felt his presence but far enough that I had to find my balance. He expected nothing less than the best from me, and after my parents' divorce when I was 12, he stepped up to play both roles, becoming fiercely protective of me. I fell in love with Caleb during my sophomore year of college. He had this effortless way of making me laugh, and I felt alive in ways I couldn't explain. Our differences were palpable. While I strived for perfection, my dad's influence still loomed large. Caleb thrived in a world of creativity and spontaneity, often nudging me to break free from my carefully crafted plans. Our relationship flourished, but there was always this looming question in my mind: would my dad approve of him? Things took a sour turn when my family invited me to dinner, a rare event since our schedules rarely aligned. I was excited to introduce Caleb to my dad, hoping they'd hit it off and I'd finally have some peace of mind regarding my father's opinions on my choices. The evening started pleasantly enough, but as the conversation turned, I felt the tension in the air when the topic of Caleb's career in graphic design came up. My father, who had always prioritized traditional paths, openly criticized Caleb's work, dismissing it as a hobby rather than a viable career. I could feel my heart race as Caleb sat there, visibly uncomfortable, trying to maintain his composure while my father launched into a monologue about the virtues of financial security and a stable job. I had been quiet, biting my tongue, but suddenly, I felt this surge of protectiveness swell within me. "Dad, that's unfair," I finally said. "Caleb works hard for what he does. Being a creative doesn't mean he isn't ambitious." The moment my words left my mouth, the room went eerily silent. I held my breath, anticipating my father's reaction as the tension seemed to cling to the walls. He frowned, his disappointment palpable. "You shouldn't be defending him, Ava. You need to look out for yourself, not this boy who can't even provide stability." I felt a flash of anger stir up my insides, blurring that well-practiced boundary of respect I usually maintained. "I'm not defending him, Dad, I'm defending what I believe in. He's passionate and talented, and honestly, I think you're missing the bigger picture." Caleb shot me a grateful glance, but I could tell the weight of scrutiny had doubled. The conversation spiraled. My dad chastised me for placing my love life above my future, and I accused him of living in a box built by his own rigid beliefs. It was an unusual role reversal. My voice seemed to overpower his, yet in the pit of my stomach lingered this heavy sense of dread. Was I being unreasonable? As emotions continued to clash, I realized I felt torn. Here was my dad, who had sacrificed so much for me, and on the other hand, Caleb, who had become my world in such a short time. I saw how frustrated Caleb was becoming and how my dad's words seemed to chip away at his self-esteem, even if he tried to hide it with that charming smile. "I think I need to go," Caleb finally said, his tone strained, and it felt like a punch to the gut. I watched as he stood up, the vulnerability in his posture cutting deeper than any argument could. My chest tightened, and I fought the urge to call him back, but instead, I just stood there, caught in this awful limbo of loyalty and love. After he'd left, my father said, "See, Ava? That's exactly what I'm talking about." But his words only fueled my determination. I wasn't going to let this end here. I spent days reflecting on that dinner as I kept in touch with Caleb, our conversations growing sweet and tender through late-night texts. I realized I needed to stand up for our love, to carve my own path rather than allow my father's expectations to influence my decisions. It took a few more awkward dinners and conversations, but slowly, I began to cultivate this new understanding between us. I invited Caleb over for coffee one afternoon, brainstorming ways to maybe patch things up. Eventually, I found the courage to invite my dad to meet with us again, and I explained how important Caleb was to me. I wanted my father to see beyond the surface, to understand the depth of Caleb's character, the kindness, the creativity, the way he believed in me just as fiercely as my dad did. When the day came for us to sit down together, my hands were clammy with nerves. I was shocked to see Caleb and my dad shake hands, both visibly tense. But this time, my voice held steadiness as I guided the conversation, sharing stories about Caleb's projects and aspirations. There were moments of quiet where skepticism hung in the air, but slowly, I watched as my dad's expression shifted, curiosity taking the place of disdain. They even exchanged a few laughs, and by the end of the afternoon, my dad begrudgingly admitted that he underestimated the depth of Caleb's passion. I could feel a weight lift off my shoulders, a tentative bridge being built between the two most important men in my life. Looking back now, I can't help but reflect on those swirling emotions and the daunting task of reconciling family expectations with love. My father's approval is still something I hold dear, and while Caleb and I still face challenges regarding our paths, we've grown stronger for it. I can wholeheartedly say that standing up for what I believe in was the right choice. Sometimes, love needs defense, especially when it's challenged by those who care about us most. Update: after that dinner, things have genuinely improved. My dad even asked to see some of Caleb's artwork, and I caught him smiling at a few pieces. It's still a work in progress, but I feel like we're finally striking a balance. Caleb has a small exhibition coming up, and my dad is planning to attend. Who knows, maybe they'll bond over creativity after all. I'm ready for whatever comes next, holding love and family close. It's been a few weeks since that dinner where tensions ran high but ultimately led to some breakthroughs. I've been thinking a lot about how love isn't just a feeling but a series of choices we make, sometimes in the face of opposition. My relationship with Caleb feels more solid than ever now. Each evening, after long days spent at work, we'd return to my cozy little apartment filled with the scent of his latest cooking experiments, usually something vibrant and aromatic. I would sit at the kitchen island, watching him chop vegetables with deft hands while sharing stories about our day, the comfort of his presence melting away the stresses of the outside world. He often joked about his own art, claiming that cooking was just another form of creativity, albeit with delicious results. The laughter that bounced off the walls during these moments felt like little victories, reminders of the bond we were nurturing together. However, the shadow of that family dinner lingered in my mind, especially as I grew excited about the upcoming exhibition. Caleb had poured his heart, his very essence, into his art, and I was both proud and anxious. Would my dad truly come? The thought of my two worlds colliding was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. One afternoon, I was organizing the invites for the exhibition in our shared workspace. I came across a beautiful canvas that Caleb had kept under wraps. It was his latest piece, a vibrant abstract bursting with swirls of color, emotion radiating from every brushstroke. I asked him about it, and he reluctantly revealed that it was inspired by his struggles, his feelings of insecurity, of being a misfit in a world that seemed to favor conventional status quos. As he described his process, I could see the passion in his eyes. A thought crossed my mind: if my dad could see beyond the surface, maybe he could understand Caleb's journey, the vulnerability he infused into every work of art. The day of the exhibition arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. The gallery echoed with the anticipatory energy of art lovers and critics mingling in hushed tones, their gazes swept across the canvas walls. When I finally spotted my dad entering, his expression was inscrutable. Caleb gave him a genuine smile from across the room, his enthusiasm palpable, and I squeezed my hands together, silently urging my dad to let his guard down. As the evening progressed, I caught snippets of conversation. My dad scrutinized the artwork, sharing anecdotes with fellow attendees, and to my relief, I noticed his expression soften when he commented on one of Caleb's pieces. They eventually gravitated toward each other, and before I knew it, Caleb was showcasing his work, sharing not only the artistic techniques but the stories woven into each piece. The highlight of the night was when Caleb revealed that the colorful abstract I had seen earlier represented the complexity of human emotion, the very thing that often isolates us. My heart swelled with pride, and I watched my dad through the crowd as confusion gave way to understanding. He listened intently, a flicker of something like admiration flickering in his eyes. I breathed a sigh of relief, allowing myself to hope that this exhibition wasn't merely a stepping stone for Caleb, it also served as a bridge between my father's skepticism and Caleb's dreams. As the night wore on, I couldn't help but notice the moments of laughter shared between them, two souls who had once clashed but were now stepping cautiously into the light of each other's worlds. After the exhibition, I found the two of them standing slightly apart, discussing art. I felt a surge of warmth, They were laughing, the walls that had divided them starting to crumble. My dad even complimented Caleb, saying he admired his unique approach. Those words settled like a sweet balm over my heart, soothing the worries that had kept me awake at night. As I moved closer, catching snippets of conversation, I realized that my hope wasn't misplaced. They were talking openly, sharing their perspectives, and I felt as if I were witnessing a new chapter unfold before my eyes. Later that night, when Caleb and I lay side by side on our couch, the glow of the city lights filtering through the window, I couldn't contain my excitement. "I think they really connected tonight," I whispered, my voice barely breaking the comfortable silence. He nodded slowly, tracing patterns on my arm as a smile spread across his face. "Your dad has a lot of wisdom. I just hope he sees that my work comes from a place of honesty," I reassured him, my heart racing. "He does, he really does. I felt it, Caleb. Whatever it is, we're making progress." He wrapped me close, and I realized, in that moment, that love isn't just about finding the right person, it's about creating a little sanctuary amidst the chaos of conflicting lives. When we support one another, we create spaces for understanding, transformation, and healing. As I drifted to sleep that night, visions of the exhibition danced in my mind, vignettes of laughter, creativity, and warmth. Perhaps the road ahead still held challenges, but we were ready for them, carrying love and family close to our hearts, ever hopeful for what lay ahead. The day of Caleb's exhibition arrived, and I stood before the mirror, adjusting my hair and replaying the countless scenarios in my mind. Each thought seemed to intertwine like threads in a tapestry, weaving together excitement and apprehension. What if my dad was still skeptical? What if Caleb felt uncomfortable in the spotlight? But as I stepped into the living room, I found myself inexplicably buoyed by the bright morning light streaming through the window, illuminating the tight-knit atmosphere of anticipation that surrounded us. Caleb paced nervously, tiny flecks of paint smudged on his hands, remnants of late-night creativity. He caught my eye and smiled, a mix of vulnerability and pride gracing his features, and I knew this moment mattered more than the fear swirling in my mind. We arrived at the gallery, an eclectic space bursting with vibrant colors and the chatter of other artists and patrons. My heart raced as we walked through the entrance, the walls adorned with Caleb's pieces, each stroke, each color, an echo of his soul. Glancing towards my dad's reserved expression, I noticed a flicker of curiosity beneath his stoic demeanor. It was as if he stepped into an entirely new world where the art spoke louder than words, unearthing emotions that had long often been buried. As the evening unfolded, friends gathered, laughter floated through the air, and more than a handful of warm exchanges transpired, my connection with Caleb growing deeper amidst the shared joy around us. My dad, quietly attentive, lingered near one of Caleb's larger pieces, a brilliant depiction of a stormy ocean met by a delicate sunrise. I could see his brow furrowed slightly, and in that moment, I felt this strange mix of hope and dread. What was he thinking? Caleb approached, his own uncertainty evident, but to my astonishment, my dad struck up a conversation, sparking a dialogue about the inspiration behind the painting. As I hovered nearby, pretending to examine other works while holding my breath, I listened to them exchange thoughts on creation and passion, their faces lighting up with every shared enthusiasm. There was something extraordinary about that moment, watching my worlds collide, like the sun breaking through clouds. I found myself reflecting on how art can bridge gaps, creating shared experiences that foster understanding. It wasn't just the bonds we cherished with those we love, it was also about allowing them to redefine assumptions about who we are and what we're capable of. Hours slipped by in a slow, colorful dance of connection, and as the gallery began to wind down, Caleb offered my dad a framed piece that he hadn't intended to display. It was a small canvas of a sunset casting hues of orange and lavender over a silhouetted shoreline, the waves gently lapping at one another, capturing the serenity of nature, themes of hope and possibility layered within the brushstrokes. "I thought you might appreciate this," Caleb said, his voice steady despite the tension that still lingered in the air. Dad's expression softened as he accepted the gift, his fingers tracing over the edges of the frame, seeming to absorb its significance. It was as if all the barriers that once existed were systematically crumbling right before my eyes. Dad glanced up at Caleb, and for the first time, I caught a glimpse of recognition, a sense of understanding that transcended boundaries. "I'd like to learn more about your work, Caleb," he said, and the words hung in the air like music, sweet and unhurried. After the exhibition, I found myself drawing a breath of relief, my body instinctively relaxing. We drove home in a comfortable silence, Caleb's hand clasped tightly in mine. The possibilities of a reconciled relationship between my dad and the love of my life felt tangible, like the name of a spell whispered in the dark. As days turned into weeks, my dad consistently asked about Caleb's latest projects, engaged in conversations with full-blown enthusiasm, and I witnessed the transformation of two previously disconnected worlds. Our family dinners transitioned from awkward silences to lively discussions, laughter spilling around the table as stories unfolded like delicate origami. Reflecting on the journey, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over me. It was undeniably hard navigating love between family and partners, and yet it seemed we were learning to make room for all that life threw at us. Even simple moments, sharing our thoughts over dinner, visiting the gallery again, or watching the sunset together, redefined our connections in a fresh light. After a month, Caleb humorously dubbed my dad his new art critic. I could only laugh, grateful for the emergence of something so beautiful from what had once felt so threatening. The path ahead remained full of surprises, but we'd walk it hand in hand, a little more resilient with every stride. And every night, as I tucked myself into bed, my heart overflowed, cocooned within the safety of love and the newfound bond of family. This interconnectedness, was more than I had ever hoped for. Each day was a testament to what could be achieved when love was held fiercely amidst life's unexpected challenges, slowly morphing into something rare and profound. The horizons before us now stretched far and wide, yet still, under the painted stars, I felt a sense of peace knowing we were ready to embrace all that lay ahead.